Chapter 901. Evan. Sivir and the other members of the Rose mercenary group were shocked. They had fought side by side with Sivir many times, and the main magician of the Rose mercenary group had chosen to betray them at a time like this. Eva was flung to the ground by Evan. Lying on the ground, she looked at the demon who was kneeling in front of him, begging for mercy, and even wanted to give them to him as playthings. She felt as if she had been struck by lightning. The great hero in her heart, the powerful magician in his white robe, the handsome elf who was knowledgeable and extraordinary, and the man who she had given her everything to, at this moment, his image in her heart collapsed in an instant, and she fell into an endless abyss. How bad could a person be to do such a thing? In the face of life and death, she finally saw what kind of scum was hidden under those blinded things. Eva grinned, but she smiled. She seemed to have forgotten what it was like to cry. Meg pressed a button in his pocket and picked up Amy. He looked at Eva calmly, without any pity. Then, his eyes fell on Evan, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in his eyes. "Beg me to let you go." The demon looked down at Evan, who was kneeling in front of him, with great interest. He rarely saw such an obedient elf. Thinking of this, he stretched out a foot and grinned. "Lick it clean, and I'll let you live." Evan raised his head to look at the foot in front of him, and a strong stench of a corpse wafted toward him. It was as if the foot had just been scooped out of a pool of corpse water, and was stained with a lot of damp soil. Without any hesitation, Evan knelt on the ground and took 2 steps forward before licking the foot with his tongue. Shameless. Scott clenched his long sword, his face full of anger. The other mercenaries had the same expression. They couldn't wait to draw their swords and kill this traitor. "Hey, uncle, does Lass's foot smell good?" Amy, who was in Meg's arms, asked curiously. Evan, who was licking vigorously, suddenly stiffened. However, he quickly continued licking as if he was not affected in the slightest. The will-o'-the-wisp had a look of enjoyment on its face as it allowed Evan to lick it. It wasn't in a hurry to attack. In the giant valley 5 or 6 kilometers away, there were many mercenary groups looking for herbs. Most of the mercenaries were weak and couldn't beat the powerful magical beasts. They could only come to the giant valley to try their luck. "Look. What's that?" At this time, on the cliff near the exit of the valley, a mercenary who was picking herbs discovered the red flames in the direction of the basin and exclaimed, "It's a flare." It was the signal flare issued by the Grey Temple today. Could it be that another mercenary group was attacked? No way. They're so close to us. Will they come over? Where are the people from the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle? Have they not arrived yet? Did another mercenary group get wiped out? The news quickly spread throughout the giant valley, causing a huge commotion and panic. However, a few of the stronger mercenary groups quickly formed teams. Dozens of mercenaries rushed towards the basin to provide assistance. Signal flares rose into the sky, dyeing the sky red. It was particularly eye-catching in the wilderness. "Oh no! Someone's been attacked again. Send the signal to gather everyone in the direction of the giant valley." Brandley was one of the leaders of the secret search team. He happened to be near the giant valley, and his expression changed immediately when he saw the signal flare. Another signal flare rose into the sky, and exploded into a golden arrow in the air, pointing directly in the direction of the giant valley. In the wilderness, countless members of the Grey Temple were hiding in the giant valley. Of course, there were also mercenary groups who gave up on their mercenary missions and rushed towards the giant valley. No one knew if they could make it in time, but they all knew that the enemy was definitely powerful. However, as a citizen of Chaos City, no one could sit back and watch such a thing happen. Evan licked the will-o'-the-wisp demon's big foot until there was not a trace of dirt left. He then looked up at the demon with a hopeful expression. The demon wiped the foot on Evan's face with a satisfied expression. He nodded, and said, "Very good. I've never seen such an obedient elf like you. I didn't want to kill you, but I've decided to keep you by my side from now on. It's very comfortable." All of the surrounding demons and orcs also burst into laughter as they looked at Evan with a mocking expression. Evan's face flushed red immediately, but he held it all back, and put on a flattering smile again. He looked at the fiend, and said, "It's my fortune to be able to stay by your side and sleep with you, sir." Dennis spat on the ground and looked at Evan with disgust as he said, "What a spineless guy. Even if you survive, you'll only lick someone's foot for the rest of your life. A real man wouldn't do such a thing. You can be a bootlicker for the rest of your life. We'll laugh even if we die." Scott looked at Evan with a mocking smile. Kyle looked at Evan with disgust. She should have refused to let him join the Rose mercenary group. Now, he had completely tarnished the Rose mercenary group. If the Rose mercenary group was destroyed here, she didn't know how to explain it to her father, who had given it to her. Evan felt the stares, and his face was full of madness. He knelt on the ground and crawled a few steps toward the demon. He said in a trembling voice, "Master, kill them. Kill these noisy bastards. Then take these 2 women away. That woman must be very comfortable to use. And that kid. Take that kid too. It's about time. Those fools from the Grey Temple should be on their way, right? It's really fun to play with them." The ghost fire demon kicked Evan to the side and licked his lips. Looking at the mercenary group that was still in the defensive formation, he said with a smile, "Now, it's your turn. Who should I start with?" The vigilance on everyone's faces intensified, and a poisoned dagger was already hidden in Sivir's left sleeve. Only Eva was still lying on the ground in a daze. Her eyes were glazed over, and she wore an expression that seemed to be both crying and laughing at the same time. After looking around, the demon's gaze landed on Mag. His smile widened as he pointed at Mag. "Bring that little piglet over and give it to me personally. Then, lick my other leg clean, and I will spare your life." "What if I refuse?" Meg frowned. "Then you'll die, and she'll still be mine." The demon looked at Meg and grinned, revealing a row of sharp teeth. "I refuse," Meg said calmly. "Then, you're dead." The demon reached out his right hand to Meg. A ball of green will-o'-the-wisp condensed in his palm. "Kill him. Kill them all." Evan, who was holding his stomach and unable to get up, looked at Meg and shouted crazily, "Protect them." Kyle shouted and raised the boomerang in his hand. A woo. Just then, a loud cry sounded in the air. A huge body swooped down like a bolt of purple lightning, leaving behind a purple afterimage. "How?" The demon's expression changed drastically. He wanted to raise his head. However, it was too late. A pair of sharp claws pierced through the demon's body and lifted him up into the air. With a rip, he was torn in half. Blood and will-o'-the-wisp filled the sky. Chapter 902. The dozens of mercenaries were still hurrying from the giant valley to the basin. The distance of 5 to 6 kilometers didn't seem to be very far, but the mountain roads were extremely treacherous, and even unicorns couldn't run very fast. "Look. What's that?" Someone in the group suddenly exclaimed as he pointed toward the basin. All of the mercenaries turned toward that direction with astonishment etched on their faces. A griffin plunged into the basin like a bolt of purple lightning, then took to the air again in an instant before tearing a humanoid object in half with its sharp claws. That's a purple-striped griffin. Could that be Alex's legendary griffin? Is there a second one on the Norland continent? That's a mutated 10th-tier lightning griffin that was tamed by Alex, and it only listens to him. I didn't think that it would appear here. Seeing as Master Alex is here, then there's no need to worry. All of the mercenaries were discussing spiritedly among themselves, and all of them were feeling a lot more relieved. However, they didn't slow down in the slightest. Even if they couldn't help, it would still be a great boast if they could witness Alex in battle. Alex really is a man of his word. Brandley had already arrived at the giant valley, and he looked toward the basin with a gratified expression. All of the Grey Temple members wore different expressions, but all of them were slightly relieved. "Master, this is the responsibility of our Grey Temple, after all. If Alex interferes, won't the reputation of our Grey Temple be?" A magic caster beside Brandley said in a soft voice. The Grey Temple's reputation was built up by the seniors of the Grey Temple who fought to the death for the safety of Chaos City. They sacrificed their lives to protect the citizens of Chaos City. It won't be affected just because someone protected the citizens before the Grey Temple. Brandley looked at that magic caster with a cold expression, and said, "I feel like you're degrading the reputation of the Grey Temple by saying something like that." The magic caster blushed as he hurriedly lowered his head, and said, "My apologies." Reinforcements were still on the way, and everyone in the basin was completely astonished by the sight of green will-o'-the-wisps and dark green blood flying through the air. The 8th rank demon, which was so powerful that it made people despair, was torn to pieces so easily. It didn't even struggle. A head with wide eyes fell from the sky and rolled right in front of Evan. The pair of dead fish eyes seemed to still be looking at him. Evan took a few steps back in horror and looked at the head in disbelief. Dark green blood drenched his body, making him look very pathetic. Just now, he had licked his feet like a dog and was willing to be a slave in exchange for a chance to live. Then, he wanted to kill the woman who embarrassed him and everyone present. And now, this undefeatable ghostfire demon had been torn to pieces by a griffin. The sudden reversal left him in a daze. He didn't even know if he should be happy about his freedom or sad about his master's death. "It's Alex's purple-striped griffin." Scott looked up at the griffin in the sky, and his eyes immediately lit up as he exclaimed, "That's right. Could it be that Sir Alex is here? We're saved." The members of the Rose mercenary squad, who were still in shock, were overjoyed. They tightened their defensive perimeter and stopped attacking. When Alex and Irina were roaming the continent, they were known as the bane of bad guys. Since the purple-striped griffin was here, Alex must be nearby. That meant they could survive. Alex. The demons, orcs, and trolls saw the ghostfire demon torn to pieces, and then looked up at the purple-striped griffin hovering in the sky. They were all terrified. No one knew better than them what Alex and Irina meant when they said the names. Mercenary groups that hunted wandering elves used to wreak havoc on the Norland continent. No one dared to stop them. But because of these two, the mercenary groups that hunted wandering elves had been terrorizing the Norland continent for 3 years. Many of them disbanded and went into hiding to avoid these two murderous gods. And now, these murderous gods had appeared again, right next to them. Even though they hadn't seen him yet, the purple-striped griffin was here, so he must be nearby. Resist. Even the Void Troll's patriarch was killed by him. The strongest among them, the ghostfire demon, was torn to pieces by the griffin's claws. How could they resist? What right did they have to resist? "Take the hostages," a forest troll roared. A black vine flew out from his body, wrapped around Evan, and pulled him to his side. The other 5 came back to their senses. They suppressed their fear and rushed toward the members of the Rose mercenary squad, who were still surrounded. Whether they could survive Alex's attack today depended on these hostages. The griffin lowered its head and looked down at them. It seemed to be angered by their actions. It raised its head and let out a long roar. "Howl, wow, what a beautiful lion. It has wings, and it's purple. But why does it sound so much like Daphne's dog?" Amy looked at the purple-striped griffin through Meg's fingers. Her big eyes were bright with excitement. "Is it a husky?" Meg asked with a smile. "Hey, Father, how did you know? Have you seen Daphne's stupid dog that tore down her house?" Amy looked at Meg in surprise. She whispered, "Daphne's grandpa said to make dog soup this winter. Daphne was very sad, but I still asked her to call me when she was cooking." Drinking dog broth in winter is indeed a very comfortable thing. It would be even better if there was dog meat hot pot. Mag nodded in agreement, even though he had only eaten it once. The members of the Rose mercenary squad, who were nervously preparing to deal with the demons and trolls, had strange expressions on their faces. They could still talk about dog soup and dog hot pot under such circumstances. How much did this father and daughter like to eat? Their hearts were so big that it made one's hair stand on end. Meg was calm from beginning to end. This was a trap he had set up. The roles of the prey and the hunter were not clear from beginning to end. Boom. A thunderous explosion. Chapter 903. No. The orcs and demons that were charging at the Rose mercenary squad screamed in agony. 2 orcs and 2 trolls were turned into black charcoal, falling to the ground and disintegrating into ashes. The last demon with a protruding mouth and monk-like cheeks managed to stop himself at the last moment. His body glowed with light, forcing him to retreat a few meters, barely avoiding the lightning bolt. He screamed in horror, plunged into a nearby cave, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The griffin looked in the direction of the cave, and spat out a lightning ball in annoyance. It blew up the entrance of the cave, and the collapsed boulders sealed the entrance completely. Meg also looked in the direction of the cave, and a smile appeared on his face, but he quickly hid it. So powerful. The Rose mercenary squad members, who were still on guard, heaved a sigh of relief. They looked at the griffin with admiration. If a mount is so powerful, how powerful is Alex, who hasn't shown up yet? They didn't dare to imagine. The remaining forest troll took a couple of steps back in horror. His trembling body was covered in mud and dust. Black vines wrapped around Evan, and a poisonous spike was pressed against his chest. He looked up at the purple-striped griffin, and said in a trembling voice, You, don't come any closer. If you come any closer, I'll kill him." The griffin slowly descended until it was about 10 meters above the ground. Its purple-gold eyes looked at the forest troll and Evan, and it seemed to hesitate. The forest troll's face lit up. He was right. With a hostage, Alex wouldn't attack, and gave him a chance to live. Evan felt the sharp, poisonous spike in his chest, and his face turned as white as a sheet. The tables had turned too quickly, and he only just came back to his senses. The arrogant and evil mercenary squad was now reduced to a panicked forest troll. Afraid that the griffin didn't understand the situation, he quickly cried out, "Lord Alex, save me. I'm a magic caster from Chaos City, and I'm also an elf. Didn't you say you would protect all the elves outside the wind forest? Please save me. Don't act rashly." Seeing that Evan was tactful, the forest troll didn't gag him. Today's operation had gone too smoothly. It was inevitable that they were a little complacent. They had never thought that Alex would really appear. Moreover, they hadn't even seen him. Just a griffin had almost wiped them out. "P2E, you only know that you're a magic caster from Chaos City now? Are you an elf? Could it be that the bootlicker who was licking the demon's feet and saying that he wanted to kill all of us is already dead?" Dennis spat on the ground with a mocking smile. "That's right. In order to survive, this guy is really like a mangy dog," Scott said, curling his lips. The members of the Rose mercenary group looked at Evan with disgust. What he had done before was not just running away, but betraying them. In order to save his own life, he had tried to trade the lives of all the members. Now, looking at him being held by the forest troll with a poisonous spike in his chest, no one pitied him at all. Instead, they felt that he had brought this upon himself. Hearing their words, Evan's face alternated between green and red. He looked around the crowd, and his eyes landed on Eva, who was still lying on the ground with a silly smile. His eyes lit up, and he called out hopefully, "Eva, save me. Eva, help me beg Alex's people. Ask him to save me. Eva, I'll marry you when we go back this time. I know how good you are. I really love you." Eva got up from the ground, and her eyes seemed to have lost all focus. She staggered in another direction, and murmured, "Men. Hee. Liars. All liars, Eva." Evan glared at Eva's back with a ferocious expression. "Eva, I'll go take a look." Kywil was also slightly startled. He put away his boomerang and chased after Eva. The forest troll's face showed some fear again. The guy in its hands seemed to be the most worthless hostage. The vines around Evan suddenly tightened, and the poisonous spike was almost stuck to his skin. The sudden burst of pain made Evan's face turn red. He cried out in pain, "Ah, save me. You'd rather die than live like a dog." Mag snapped his fingers as he looked at Evan, who was twisting and struggling. The purple-striped griffin's eyes suddenly became fierce, and it swooped down on the forest troll like a bolt of lightning. "Let's die together." A crazed look appeared on the forest troll's face, and its poisonous thorns pierced into Evan's heart. Countless poisonous thorns protruded from its massive body that was nearly 5 meters tall, and it instantly expanded like a balloon that was about to explode. Its sharp claws pierced through his throat and pulled out his head. Blood spurted out, and the inflated body became like a deflated balloon. It withered in an instant, and then fell to the ground with a loud crash. The 7 members of the wicked mercenary group, except for one who entered the cave, were all annihilated, including an 8th-tier ghostfire demon. The members of the Rose mercenary group were shocked speechless. A woo, the purple-striped griffin circled around the basin, and let out an excited cry towards the crowd, as if it was asking for praise. Then, it abruptly raised its head, and flew upwards, almost sticking to the stone wall. Like a purple lightning bolt, it disappeared into the small horizon of the basin. So fast. It would be great if I could sit for a while. Amy looked up and said with some longing. Mag patted the little one's head with a smile. Such a wish was easy to fulfill. This is also my dream, Dennis raised his head and said sympathetically. Meg raised an eyebrow. This wish could not be fulfilled. The purple-striped griffin disappeared into the sky. Alex did not appear from the beginning to the end. However, an opponent like this did not require his help. The basin regained its peace, leaving behind a ground full of corpses and ashes. The small reptiles were still trembling in the cave. The members of the Rose mercenary group smiled, as if they had survived a disaster. Evan died under the forest troll's poisonous spike. His eyes were wide open. However, they did not feel sad about his death. Instead, they felt a sense of satisfaction, as if they had vented their anger. Thinking about how they had been teammates with this guy for 3 months, they still felt a lingering fear. Kywell brought Eva back, but she did not seem to be in a good state. She seemed to have gone crazy, constantly tearing her hair and muttering, "Man, liar, liar, man." Chapter 904. Everyone in the Rose mercenary squad turned to look at Mag and Amy. The father and daughter who had been talking about eating dog meat seemed to be the calmest people in the entire ordeal. How could they be so calm when they almost died at the hands of a demon? The Grey Temple should be on their way after such a big incident, right? It should be safe nearby. It's still early, so we want to watch the show for a while longer, Mag said to everyone with a smile. Yes, it's fun to watch the show, Amy said, clapping her hands. Sivir turned to Mag with a hint of surprise on her face. If a normal person were to encounter something like this, they would definitely rush back to Chaos City and stay in a safe place. However, the two of them were the exact opposite. They wanted to stay and watch the show. Meg was right. The Grey Temple should be here soon. This was the scene where the killer was killed. It would be the safest place in the entire wilderness. She nodded. Okay. But what do you want to do with the golden scale deer, Mr. Meg? This was the biggest reward of their trip. Evan was dead, and Eva had gone crazy. This was a big blow to the Rose mercenary squad. With this money, they might be able to find a good magician and healer. Mag glanced at the dead golden scale deer, and said, according to our plan, I'll take this pair of horns, and the rest will be left to young Mistress Sivir. Okay. Kywell nodded. She walked quickly to the golden scale deer and squatted down. She pulled out a dagger from her waist and cut off 2 golden horns that were about 30 centimeters long. She handed them to Meg. After everything is done, I'll send half of the reward to your restaurant, Mr. Meg. Thank you. Mag nodded. He liked this kind of girl who could save him trouble and worry. He stuffed the 2 golden horns into his bag. Sivir turned to everyone, and said, the Grey Temple will definitely need our cooperation in their investigation. Monkey, you and I will take Eva back first. Everyone else, wait here for a while. These guys are most likely not all of them. If we can help the Grey Temple eliminate all of the murderers, then that would be a good thing. Okay. The others nodded. Monkey picked up the golden scale deer and followed Kywell, who was holding Eva's hand, to a path up the cliff. Bye, Sister Leather Pants. Amy waved at Kywell. Bye, little Amy. Kywell waved. You guys should be enough to explain the situation. We'll go up first. It's higher, so we'll have a better view. Bye, everyone. Meg smiled at the others, holding Amy in his arms. The others nodded with a strange expression. Boss Mag, we've been through life and death situations together. Can you give us a discount the next time we come to eat at your restaurant? Dennis asked with a smile. That won't do. Meg shook his head and smiled. But if you're free on a day off, I'll treat you to a meal. I'll make the wine and cook the food. Then I'll definitely come. Count me in. Mr. Mac is a real brother. Everyone laughed, and the haze left behind by the previous battle also dissipated. When Meg climbed up the cliff with Amy, Brandley, and the Grey Temple people arrived at the edge of the basin. He was surprised to see the two people climbing up. "Mr. Mac, little boss, why are you here?" Mag smiled bitterly. "It's my day off today, so I went out with Amy to collect materials. We met the Rose mercenary squad on the way, but we ran into a bunch of lunatics. Luckily, we were saved by a big griffin. I don't know if I should say it's good luck or bad luck." "Yeah, it was a big lion that could fly." Amy nodded. "I see." Brandley nodded in response. They had encountered the leader of the Rose mercenary squad earlier, but they were wounded on the carriage, and there were other members waiting for them in the basin, so they were sent back to Chaos City without any questions. However, he didn't expect to see Mag and Amy here as well, so he hurriedly asked, "Are you hurt?" "Especially little boss." "We're not hurt." Meg shook his head and stroked Amy's back. "But Amy was a little scared, so we want to go back. There are still a few members of the Rose mercenary squad down there. They should be able to tell you what you want to know." "I'm so scared." Amy pressed her head against Meg's chest like a frightened kitten. "I'm glad you're okay." Brandley heaved a sigh of relief. If anything happened to Amy, who knew what Crassus and Julian would do? Seeing Amy in such a pitiful state, even he felt sorry for her. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll ask them to send Mr. Mac and Little Boss back. Don't bring Little Boss to such a dangerous place next time." Meg shook his head and pointed at the horse tied to the side. "There's no need to send us back. You need more people, and the road is full of people, so it should be safe. Besides, we have horses." Brandley hesitated for a moment. The most important thing now was to find all the murderers and kill them all. He nodded and said, "Okay. Be careful." Mag nodded and said, "All right. You guys be careful too. There was a demon that ran into the cave earlier. He might still be down there. There are still survivors." Brandley's eyes lit up. He bade farewell to Meg and led the Grey Temple members down the basin. "Father, didn't you say you wanted to watch the show? Why did you lie and leave?" Amy raised her head from Meg's chest and looked at Meg in confusion. "Because I'm going to take Amy to save the world." Meg untied a horse from a tree and mounted it with Amy in his arms. He looked back at the basin and urged the horse to gallop toward a small mountain path. "Save the world? You mean, beat up bad guys?" Amy's eyes lit up, and she was very eager to try. "That's right. Those guys are all big bad guys." Meg nodded. The horse passed through a dry valley, and they didn't see anyone along the way. They continued westward, and finally stopped beside a cliff. "Father, where are the big bad guys?" Amy looked around curiously. "We need a cool steed." Meg looked up into the sky. Howl tilde tilde. Chapter 905. It's that big lion that can fly. Amy's eyes lit up as she exclaimed in surprise. The griffin, which was originally charging towards Meg excitedly, heard Amy's words and began to decelerate. It landed on the cliff and circled around before flying back up again. It stopped at a height of about 10 meters and looked at Amy in bewilderment. It was as if it was looking at a scary person, but at the same time, it wanted to get closer to her. Meg was both surprised and amused. Who would have thought that such a big guy would be scared by Amy? "RZ, come down." Meg raised his head and called out to the purple-striped griffin. "Awo." RZ looked at Meg, then at Amy, and carefully descended. "RZ. That's such a cute name." Amy blinked and looked at Meg curiously. "Father, do you know it?" "Yes, it's an old friend." Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at the purple-striped griffin, who was as timid as a dog, and couldn't help but feel angry and amused at the same time. It was not cool at all. It didn't look as mighty as when it tore the demon apart with its bare hands. Instead, it looked more like a fool. He said in a louder voice, "RZ, come down." After lingering in midair for a while, the purple-striped griffin landed gently on the cliff. Even though it was looking at Amy with a wary expression, it still couldn't help but lean its head toward Mag and rub its head against his shoulder as if it were trying to curry favor with him. "Wow, it's so obedient. I want to pet RZ's head too." Amy's eyes lit up as she reached out her little hand towards Aziz's head. But before Amy's little hand could reach its head, the purple-striped griffin shrank its head back. Its eyes were wide open, and it looked as if it was about to be murdered. Meg looked at the purple-striped griffin. He still didn't know why it was so afraid of her. He comforted, "Aziz, this is Amy, my daughter. She's very kind. Little Aziz, be good. Give me your head." Amy looked at the purple-striped griffin, then took out her staff, which was taller than a person, and said with a smile, "Otherwise, I'll blow your head off." The purple-striped griffin seemed to be frightened, and it immediately stretched its head over to Amy's hand. "Good girl." Amy stroked the purple-striped griffin's trembling head, and the smile on her face was as bright as the light from her magic caster's staff. Meg. This was an unconventional first meeting. However, Mag also smiled at the sight of the purple-striped griffin, which had already stopped trembling and was beginning to enjoy itself. Although she wasn't sure why Amy was so intimidating in Z's heart, it didn't seem to be a big problem at the moment. Amy stroked Aziz's furry head and looked at Meg curiously as she asked, "Father, were you the one who commanded little Aziz to kill all those bad guys?" "You could say that." Meg nodded. "I told you Father is super awesome. Even your little pet is so powerful." Amy's expression was a little excited, but she soon sighed, and said, "But Ugly Duckling is too fat. Even if it becomes a white swan in the end, it'll definitely be a super fat white swan, the kind that can only roll on the ground." Meg imagined that scene, and the smile on his face widened. He put Amy on the ground, and took out 2 sets of black clothes from his bag. "We're going to kill all the remaining bad guys now, and then rescue the people they've captured. However, the truly powerful heroes never let others know their true faces, so we have to disguise ourselves." Amy's eyes lit up, and she asked curiously, "Is it like those legends? A hero wearing a mask saves people in trouble, but doesn't leave his name behind." "Yes, so we can't tell anyone what we're doing today, and we can't make any noise during the battle." Meg looked at Amy with a serious expression, and asked, "Can you do it, little hero Amy?" "I can." Amy nodded with a serious expression. "Very good, then let's set off." Meg put on the black windbreaker for Amy, and then put on a small black and white mask for her. After that, he also put on all his equipment, and jumped onto the griffin's back with Amy in his arms. "Let's go, Aziz. Let's go to those guys' nest." Meg patted the griffin's back gently. "Let's go." Amy yelled with joy as she spread open her arms. The griffin spread its wings and soared into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a trembling horse that was tied to the cliff. At the bottom of the basin, the people of the Grey Temple were studying the crime scene, trying to find some useful information from the bodies and ashes. Some were also cleaning up the collapsed cave entrance. Meanwhile, Brandley and a few other Grey Temple members were interrogating the Rose Mercenary Squad members. They were the ones who had experienced the incident, and were also the first batch of people to survive the attack. "Sir, it's just as we said. The demon escaped into the cave, but the entrance was destroyed by the purple-striped griffin's lightning ball. We don't know if he was killed, or if he escaped from the cave. However, these caves are very spacious, and many of them are connected. If he escaped, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to catch him," Dennis said to Brandley. He still felt a lingering fear as he thought back to what had just happened. Brandley nodded, and said, "Thank you for your hard work. The Grey Temple will take care of everything here. You can all go back to Chaos City to rest. If necessary, we may need your cooperation in the investigation. All right, this concerns the safety of us mercenaries. We'll do our best to cooperate." Everyone hurriedly nodded solemnly. "Over here." Suddenly, there was a cry of alarm from the digging cave. The combat personnel quickly rushed forward. Soon, a black demon with smoke coming out of his mouth after being struck by lightning was carried out by several spirit-binding ropes. One of his legs was crushed by a huge rock, and he was on the verge of death. Brandley stepped forward and coldly said to the demon, "Reattach his life, then pry open his mouth and find out where they're hiding." About 15 kilometers west of the basin was a mountain. To the west of the mountain was a nearly vertical cliff, forming a misty valley with the mountain on the other side. The dense fog enshrouded the entire valley, and no one could be seen beyond a few meters. At the bottom of the valley, there was a lush forest. It had been thousands of years since anyone had disturbed this place, and trees as thick as a man's arm could be seen everywhere. Chapter 906. What a thick fog. Amy followed Mag down from the griffin's back and grabbed a handful of mist as she asked with a curious expression, "That's right. Yeah, it's not easy to find a place like this." Meg nodded as he squinted at the thick fog. His sharp eyes pierced through the fog, and his vision far exceeded that of a normal person's. He could still clearly see things 100 meters away. A 10th-tier powerful being should be able to see through this level of fog. Meg looked down at Amy with a serious expression, and said, "Amy, our main mission is to rescue the hostages and protect ourselves at the same time. We have to make sure no one discovers who we are, so you only need to use your domain of extreme frost. Leave the rest to me, okay?" "Okay." Amy nodded. Meg turned to RZ, and said, "RZ, you'll be in charge of keeping an eye on and capturing anyone who tries to escape." RZ also nodded, although it didn't quite understand what kind of person could escape from Meg. "Let's go," Meg said softly as he rushed into the depths of the forest with his sword in hand. He drew his sword halfway out of its sheath before sheathing it again. A demon hiding in the trees silently fell to the ground, and its head fell to the ground with a confused look in its eyes. A pair of small golden wings appeared on Amy's back, and she followed Meg through the trees without making any sound. Her large eyes were filled with admiration as she looked at Meg's back. A silent slaughter was carried out in the forest. Meg killed all of the scouts and sentries scattered throughout the forest, and he quickly made his way to the center of the forest. In the depths of the forest, near the center of the canyon, there was a large cave in the cliff. There were a few wooden huts at the entrance of the cave, and a dozen or so orcs and demons were patrolling the area with nervous expressions. In the depths of the cave, in a separate and empty cave, a young orc looked at a muscular orc with a frightened expression, and said in a sobbing voice, "Master Xeon, what do we do now? Captain Will-o'-the-Wisp and the others should all be dead." Alex really made his move. That purple-striped griffin tore Captain Will-o'-the-Wisp into pieces. Too terrifying. It's like tearing apart a chicken. "Will we be discovered here? Let's run." "Shut up." The orc called Xeon roared angrily as he paced back and forth in the cave. Although he tried his best to maintain a calm expression, his trembling hands revealed his current mood. Alex had made a move. This was something that no one had expected. Moreover, he had directly destroyed the main fighting force of their mercenary group. Now, in the encampment, besides him, who was at level 7, there were only 2 level 6 mercenaries left. The rest of the members were all below level 6. However, if Alex really found this place, there would be no difference between level 7 and level 1. Anyway, he wouldn't be able to withstand his sword. One had to realize that even the patriarch of the spatial trolls had been slain by Alex with a single sword strike. There was most likely no one on the Norland continent who dared to claim that they were more powerful than Alex. He was very panicked, but he knew that he couldn't show it. Otherwise, everyone would want to run, and he wouldn't be able to succeed. Someone had to die. He had been in this line of work for over 20 years, and had seen the glory days and the dark ages brought on by Alex and Irina. As such, he was well aware of the inevitable fate that would befall a mercenary group that had been targeted by Alex. "How many people have you talked to about this?" Xeon asked the young orc. The orc gulped, and replied, "Most of them should have already known. However, I didn't say that Alex was the one who did it." "Very good." Xeon patted the orc's shoulder before covering his mouth with his hand. A black bone dagger protruded from his back. The young orc's eyes widened, and he died without uttering a single sound. "You were a junior that I had high hopes for, but unfortunately, I also wanted to live." Xeon's voice was trembling slightly as he placed the orc on the ground. He wiped the blood from his hand on the orc's body, and walked out of the cave with a giant axe. The heavy stone door slowly closed behind him, and he quickly walked out of the cave. The massive cave had been excavated into a series of small and sealed caves. Many of the caves were still empty, but there were also some that had been tortured by elves. They were curled up in a corner, and didn't dare to raise their heads even when they heard the sound. They only dared to sneak a peek out of the corner of their eyes, praying that the footsteps wouldn't stop in front of their doors. Despair and fear shrouded their hearts. They had seen with their own eyes the cruel deaths of their comrades who had fought side by side with them countless times. They had seen the captured women being tortured to death in every possible way. They had also suffered all kinds of torture and were locked in this dark little cave. They did not know what they were going to face next. There were already some elves who had committed suicide because they couldn't stand the torture. The elves who were still alive were fearful of death, but there was a glimmer of hope that they would be saved. They firmly believed that Chaos City wouldn't abandon them. No one knew how long they could last. Another female elf had been found to have committed suicide this morning, so they were all tied up with spirit-binding ropes and gagged in their mouths. They couldn't even bite off their tongues to commit suicide. The demons and orcs were patrolling back and forth in the passageway, and any strange movements could result in a vicious beating and sexual assault. Xeon arrived at the entrance of the cave, and looked at the dozen or so demons and orcs standing there as he said, "The team leader and the deputy team leader have all been killed by the Grey Temple. The situation is very urgent, and we have to prepare to evacuate. Go and gather everyone here, and then kill all of the elves and women. Get ready to leave this place." Everyone's expressions changed slightly upon hearing the news. The team leader who had just left had told them to prepare some women and fine wine, and now he was dead. It was far too sudden. A hesitant demon asked, "Master Xeon, even if we're going to evacuate, why don't we take those elves with us? They're the last of our mercenary group's assets. We can sell them off on the demon islands, and we'll be able to live a good life for a while." A forest troll chimed in, "Indeed. The team leader and the others are all dead, so our mercenary group is most likely going to disband. Why don't we split up these elves and go our separate ways?" Xeon thought about it for a moment before nodding, and said, "That's a good idea. You guys go and gather everyone here. You guys go in and keep an eye on those elves. Don't let anything happen to them." Everyone dispersed. Half of them entered the cave, while the other half spread out into the forest to gather more people. Xeon took a glance at the cave before picking up his axe and preparing to leave. Chapter 907. Xeon's expression changed drastically, and he stopped in his tracks. His whole body began to tremble as if he had heard the voice of a demon king. Sweat poured down his forehead, but he didn't dare to turn around. Mag walked out of the fog with his blood-stained long sword. He narrowed his eyes as he looked at the tall orc who didn't dare to move at all at the entrance of the cave. This was a 7th-tier orc, and his power was 1 tier higher than his. However, he seemed to be frightened by him, and stood still. This scene made him feel a little amused. "Are you going to slit your own throat, or do you want me to do it?" Meg walked slowly toward Xeon, and his feet made a rustling sound as he stepped on the soft leaves. More and more cold sweat poured down Xeon's forehead. The footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer, and every step seemed to be stepping on his heart. The hidden sentries and spies in the forest didn't give any warning, but that was normal. It would be strange if they had the chance to give a warning in front of Alex. He didn't want to die, but he couldn't remember any of his seniors who had successfully escaped from Alex and Irina. Even the Carlo mercenary squad, which had 3 10th-tier powerhouses, was annihilated overnight. Not even a single ordinary mercenary escaped. Resist. Xeon felt his trembling hands almost unable to hold the heavy axe in his hands. He was only a 7th-tier warrior, and he wanted to resist Alex. He was crazy. Drops of sweat slid down his cheeks, and his mind was completely blank. He began to regret suggesting that the captain lead the mercenary squad to ambush the other mercenary squads near Chaos City. That was why they met Alex, the god of death. "Looks like I still have to do it," Meg said calmly, standing 3 meters away. "Ah, I'll kill you." Xeon's eyes turned blood-red instantly. His already tall and muscular body grew again, and he became like the Hulk. He stomped his feet on the ground, creating a huge pit. His body spun, and the big axe in his hand swept toward Meg at the same time. The blade of the axe was wrapped in a blood-red light, and it chopped down at Meg from above. The space rippled, and there were signs of it being cut open. Meg's gaze was very serious. This was the strongest opponent he had faced so far with his true strength. However, he did not panic because he was also at the pinnacle of the 6th rank. He was only one step away from the 7th rank. Moreover, his opponent's seemingly unstoppable axe was full of flaws in his eyes. Beast men were known for their great strength, and were a race that could engage in close combat with forest trolls. However, it was also because of this that their combat techniques were extremely crude and straightforward. Meg bent his leg slightly, and with a soft sound, the leaves on the ground collapsed into a small pit. Meg's figure instantly rose up, and the tip of his foot lightly stepped on the side of the axe. Taking advantage of the momentum, he raised his long sword and slit Xion's throat, and then split half of his face into two from his chin. Clang! The giant axe fell to the ground, and Jean slowly fell to the ground with his eyes wide open. He looked at the masked man with a black cloak, his eyes filled with disbelief. This sword was very fast, but not as strong as he had imagined. This was not the strength that a 10th rank should have, and it was even more impossible for Alex to swing a sword. This was because Alex would not have needed to dodge his attack. Then who was this person? Jean's heart was filled with doubts and unwillingness. His eyes were wide open, and his head was tilted to the side. He was already dead. Combat experience is indeed a good thing, especially when dealing with these fellows who rely on brute force. Meg looked at Jean's corpse and thought silently to himself. The effect of Alex's countless combat experiences began to become more and more obvious as he faced more and more powerful opponents. Just like this time when he was fighting above his rank, Meg had effortlessly killed a 7th rank beastman with precise judgment and powerful combat techniques. However, Meg was not too complacent. They were both 7th rank beastmen, and if he had faced a similarly experienced knight, it would have been much more difficult for him to win. If he had faced a 7th rank magic caster, he would have to consider whether he could get close to him before he was killed by magic. Father, you're so powerful. You killed these baddies as easily as swatting flies. Amy flapped her little wings and followed up, looking at Meg with admiration. Amy, it's up to you now. Meg turned to look at Amy, and walked into the cave with his long sword. The commotion at the entrance of the cave had already spread into the cave. The orcs and demons that Jean had sent to watch over the elves had panicked looks on their faces. Their captain and vice-captain had just been killed. Could it be that the people of the Grey Temple had come to find them so quickly? Could it be that the Grey Temple has come to save us? The eyes of the elves, who were originally in despair, lit up, and they looked out through the narrow gap of the stone door. The demons who usually acted like tyrants were all panic-stricken at this moment, giving them hope. The sound outside the cave suddenly disappeared, and silence ensued. This made the demons even more terrified. A dozen demons and orcs stood in the passageway, holding weapons in their hands, and at a loss for what to do. Hurry up and capture them. Even if the people of the Grey Temple come, we still have hostages in our hands. Perhaps we can still exchange them for our lives, a demon who appeared to be the leader of the group yelled. The demons and orcs all came to their senses, and hurriedly opened the prison doors. They dragged the bound elves out of the cave, and pressed their daggers and long swords against their necks as they looked in the direction of the cave entrance anxiously. The elves were all tied up, and their mouths were stuffed with rags. They couldn't make a single sound, but their eyes were also fixed in the direction of the passageway. Even if they were going to die, they would at least be able to die in peace after witnessing these guys being killed. The sound of footsteps sounded from the entrance of the cave, following which a man in black robes and a black and white mask appeared at the entrance of the passageway. He was holding a long sword in his hand. Only one person? All of the demons and orcs faltered upon hearing the sound of footsteps. That sword. That sword. All of a sudden, a demon's gaze fell on the sword that the man was holding, and his face instantly paled as he said in a trembling voice, "It's him. Alex the Killing God. Alex the Killing God." All of the demons and orcs' expressions changed drastically upon hearing that. They looked at the man slowly making his way out of the passageway, and their bodies began to tremble involuntarily. Some of them even dropped their weapons. Alex. All of the elves' expressions also changed upon hearing that, and they all stared at the black-robed man with incredulity in their eyes. His face was concealed by a black and white mask, but the extremely renowned sword on the Norland continent was a clear indication of his identity. I declare that all of you deserve to die. Chapter 908. WWXX by. Chapter 909. After confirming that there was no one nearby, the purple-striped griffin swooped down and landed on the edge of the cliff again. Meg, who had already changed out of his black robe, jumped off the griffin's back with Amy in his arms. He patted RZ's head with a smile, and said, "Let's go back, RZ." Howl tilde RZ shook its head and looked at Meg reluctantly as if it was acting coquettishly. "Let's go back, RZ," Amy said as she patted RZ's head. RZ flew up into the sky with a whoosh, and circled around Meg and the others twice before rising up and disappearing into the horizon. "We should go back too." Meg retracted his gaze, and carried Amy onto the horse's back. He comforted the horse that was frightened by the griffin, and rode back to Chaos City. Amy turned to look at Meg as if she had discovered a new continent. Her little face was full of admiration, and she said, "Father, you're so awesome. Apart from cooking, you're also very good at beating up bad guys." Actually, Father has another identity, but I have too many enemies, so I can't let others know yet. Today's matter is a secret between Amy and I. You can't tell anyone else, okay? Meg said to Amy with a smile. A secret between Father and me. Then Amy has a secret too. Amy's eyes lit up, and she nodded as she said, "I'll definitely keep this a secret." Good girl. Meg patted her head with a smile. Ding. The restaurant's upgrade is complete. The expansion of the restaurant has been completed. According to the host's request, the accommodation area on the second floor has also been upgraded. The host's elephant food bar quota for this month has been used up. Please pay it back before the 10th of next month. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. What will happen if I don't pay it back? Meg asked curiously. If you don't pay it back on time, your credit score will be lowered. At the same time, your elephant food bar quota will be lowered. At the same time, it will affect your credit, the system said seriously. Of course. This system is considerate enough to introduce an installment system. Can't pay it back? That's fine. The loan will be repaid in 12 monthly installments with low interest. It will help you repay the loan easily. The host then said briskly. Meg pursed his lips. You're not plagiarizing her flowers, are you? We're all in the financial industry. How can you say that you're copying? It's just a reference. The system emphasized seriously. Meg rolled his eyes. He couldn't be bothered with the system that was promoting all sorts of investments. Who the hell knew what those so-called investments he was making were? It was a game between a banker and a player. No matter how he played, he wouldn't be the one making money. After riding into Chaos City, Meg brought Amy to the Mercenary Guild. They didn't see anyone from the Rose Mercenary Squad, so they could only entrust an uncle in charge of the stables to return the horses to the Rose Mercenary Squad the next day. A horse was a very important companion for a mercenary. Meg had a griffin and a bicycle, so he didn't need a horse to travel. Therefore, he gave up on the idea of buying a good horse. Raising a good horse was more expensive than raising a good car. As a stay-at-home dad who lived within his means, he was already past that age. Besides, was there a better mount in the world than the purple-striped griffin? When Meg and the others came out of the Mercenary Guild, a group of mercenaries was talking loudly at the door. Did you hear? Another mercenary group was attacked near the Giant Valley today. Does anyone know what happened? A fat mercenary asked curiously. A middle-aged man with a goatee coughed lightly, and said, I heard about it. I even rushed over to watch the show this afternoon, but the scene had already been sealed off by the Grey Temple when I arrived. However, I heard the exact news that the culprits had failed this time. Failed? Those guys haven't failed in this period of time? The mercenaries looked at the goatee mercenary curiously. They didn't fail because they were lucky before. However, they weren't so lucky this time because they met Alex. When they were attacking, God Alex descended and killed all of them with a sword. Not a single one of them was left. The goatee mercenary raised his voice with a hint of contempt. Alex? The mercenaries were shocked when they heard that. Then, they came to a realization. If those guys really met Alex, they naturally wouldn't have survived. It's said that when Lord Alex descended, he held the heavenly lightning in one hand and waved his sword in the other. In a flash, he took the lives of those bastards. Just imagining that scene makes me excited. The goatee mercenary became more and more excited as he spoke. It was as if he was there at the scene. Meg, who happened to walk to the side, couldn't help but laugh. Holding the heavenly lightning in one hand? Did he think he was the Lightning King? This brother really should be electrocuted to wake him up a little. The goatee mercenary turned to look at Meg and said with a serious face, "Little brother, what are you laughing at? Lord Alex got rid of a big problem for us mercenaries. You have to learn to fear and respect the strong. It's because of them that we mercenaries can continue to do missions in the wilderness with peace of mind." Meg nodded with a strange expression and said, "Yes, I should respect him." "That's right." The goatee mercenary nodded with satisfaction, then turned around and continued to brag. Meg led Amy through the large square in front of the guild. Almost all the mercenaries were excitedly discussing Alex's attack. There were all kinds of fantasy and suspense versions. As someone who had experienced it himself, Meg felt that he should let them write about it. "Father, are you the person they're talking about?" After leaving the mercenary guild, Amy grabbed Meg's finger and looked up at Meg curiously. "Maybe." Meg shrugged. He didn't know the guy who held the heavenly lightning in his hand anyway. "You're amazing. They all worship you." Amy's eyes were bright, and her little face was full of pride. It was already evening when they returned to the restaurant. "Father, did someone change the appearance of our restaurant?" Amy stood at the entrance of the restaurant and exclaimed in surprise as she looked at Amy's, which had doubled in size. "Father got someone to change it. Because there are too many customers, the original size can't fit." Meg looked at the expanded store and also showed some surprise on his face. Chapter 9-10. Meg was very satisfied with the railings and green plants. If only the 32 tables were spread out, it would look like a street food stall, which would make him feel less confident when he wrote the price of the dishes. However, after the wooden railings were installed, they did not block the view and added a touch of bourgeois taste, which was worth the price. "Mr. Mac, who did you hire to build this shop? I heard some clanking sounds and came over to see that it was done. I didn't even see a shadow. Isn't this too efficient?" Meg held Amy's little hand and was about to enter when Morbai came out of the blacksmith shop and looked at Meg curiously. Meg stopped and looked at Morbai with a smile. "A renovation master that I met before. He was in a hurry, so he left right after he finished. He's a magician, the kind that doesn't do proper work, but his efficiency is not bad. Host, this system is warning you. This system is super professional." The system's angry roar sounded in Meg's mind, but Meg ignored it. "So he's a magician. No wonder." Morbai nodded with an enlightened expression. He inspected the expanded restaurant again, and turned to Mag with a smile as he said, "Boss Mag, your restaurant has doubled in size. Will it be easier for you to eat in the future? The number of customers may not be able to double in a short time, but it should be easier to line up." Meg nodded with a smile. Morbai was also troubled. Although he lived next door, he was busy forging every day. By the time he finished his work, the line was already very far away. He often couldn't eat. "That's good. Now I really miss the days when there were only 2 or 3 customers in the shop. It's not like now, where I have to look at the line in advance to eat. If I'm not careful, I'll overtake." Morbai sighed. "Beautiful things are always worth looking forward to, isn't it?" Meg said with a smile. "That's right. In order to eat Mr. Mac's food, what's the point of queuing?" Morbai also nodded with a smile. He looked left and right, then came forward and whispered, "Mr. Mac, my alcohol addiction is starting to kick in. Can you give me a glass of beer? Just 1 glass is enough. I don't want anything else." "The Morbai boss hasn't eaten yet, right?" Meg asked. "Ah, yes, I just finished work and haven't eaten yet." Morbai was stunned for a moment before nodding. "It just so happens that we haven't eaten yet. Why don't you come in for dinner and have a drink together? I still have to thank the Morbai boss for selling the shop to me. You're still the first customer this time. Meg opened the door of the restaurant and invited Morbai with a smile. All right, I won't stand on ceremony then. Morbai looked at Meg and laughed heartily. Meow, meow Tilda. As soon as the door opened, Ugly Duckling rushed out and jumped into Amy's arms. It meowed coquettishly, its big eyes full of grievance. All right, I got it. I'll take you there next time, but from today onward, your appetite has to be halved. Otherwise, I feel like you're going to become a fat orange that can't fly, Amy said with a serious expression as she carried Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meow Tilda. Ugly Duckling looked at Amy pitifully. There's no use begging me. I've already made up my mind. Amy turned her head away. She had no intention of changing her mind. She looked around the restaurant curiously. From time to time, she would play with the hydroponic plants that were planted in transparent glass bottles and hung on the wooden railings with hemp ropes. It was simple yet elegant. Meg went upstairs to change into his chef's uniform. He put on an apron as he walked to the kitchen. The door was pushed open, and a long professional kitchen appeared before Meg's eyes. After the expansion of the restaurant, the kitchen had also more than doubled in size. The single-person kitchen was a little cramped after all kinds of kitchenware, a large refrigerator, and a large water tank were stuffed in. In particular, it felt like he was surrounded by kitchenware when he had to cook several wok, skewers, and braised chicken at the same time. However, there were sharp and shiny knives hanging from the knife rack on the wall. The grill was placed in the corner, and the 4 wok pots were arranged in a row. All kinds of kitchenware were arranged according to Meg's habits, and he felt very comfortable. In addition to the horizontal expansion, the system had also increased the width of the kitchen by about half a meter. This way, the kitchen wouldn't be crowded even if there were 4 chefs cooking at the same time. Furthermore, there was more space for more kitchenware. Of course, the thing that attracted Meg's attention the most was the grill made of yellow mud beside the grill. It was the same model as the one he used to practice making roast duck in the test field for the god of cookery. This customization is really smart. Meg walked up to the grill and looked at it for a while, and nodded with satisfaction. There was probably no designer in this world who could understand what he wanted like the system, and it often exceeded his expectations. A large plate of roast beef kebabs, a large portion of spicy grilled fish, and a large glass of beer. Meg and Morbai drank to their heart's content and chatted for a long time. Morbai was the restaurant's first customer and neighbor. He was also Meg's first friend in this world. Mag had heard the dwarf blacksmith, who was determined to kill the giant dragon, talk about his past intermittently, but this was the first time he had heard him tell his complete story. Morbai's father was also an outstanding dwarven blacksmith, and the weapons he forged were very popular. Morbai learned from his father from a young age, and he also became a blacksmith. He married and had children, and lived a stable life. One day, a giant dragon attacked their tribe, and killed many innocent dwarfs, including his father. 3 years later, he left the tribe and embarked on a journey to find that giant dragon. He couldn't stand the fact that his father and tribesmen had been killed for no reason, and he wanted revenge. Otherwise, he would never be able to rest in peace. He left for over 100 years, but still didn't find that giant dragon, nor did he return to his hometown. The war among species ended, and the Norland continent welcomed 100 years of peace, but he was still on the road to revenge. Morbai raised his head and downed the entire glass of beer in one gulp. His big brandy nose was red, and he said with a determined look in his eyes, "That damned red dragon, I'm going to kill it with my own hand." Meg refilled his glass and looked at him in silence. He didn't persuade him to go home, nor did he persuade him to let go of his hatred. Morbai's choice might not be the best, but he had never experienced it, so he had no right to judge. If it were Meg, he would probably make the same choice. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Mac. When I kill that red dragon, I'll buy you a drink." Morbai was a little drunk, and he waved at the door frame before staggering toward the blacksmith's shop. Chapter 9:11. The news that Alex had saved a mercenary squad and killed all of the perpetrators was still spreading like wildfire among the mercenaries when another piece of even more exciting news began to spread. All of the elves who had been captured had been rescued. Aside from a few who had committed suicide, everyone else was still alive, and had been brought back to Chaos City from the hideout of the murderers. However, it wasn't the Grey Temple that had done all of this. Instead, it was Alex. One man, one sword, broke into the hideout alone, and killed all of the murderers. That night, the name Alex became the most talked about name in Chaos City. Some of the stories about him in the past were also dug up, and became the hottest topic of conversation. Everyone listened with great interest, and couldn't help but cheer for him. All of a sudden, everyone discovered that the world seemed to have become a lot more boring in the 3 years without Alex. Now that he was back, in less than a month's time, there were many topics that everyone liked to talk about in their leisure time. In the Battle of Rodu, 6 10th-tier powerhouses and the spatial demon Patriarch perished. Immediately afterward, he appeared in the Wind Forest, severely wounded the Elven Great Elder, and protected Irina. He then went to Chaos City and announced that he would protect all of the wandering elves. Then, on this day, he descended from the heavens again and killed all of the murderers. Even though he was a human, he was no longer just a human hero. Meg was currently holding down Ugly Duckling, which was struggling to jump out of the bathtub, with Amy. He didn't care what other people thought of him. In this world, nothing was more important than Amy, who had a bit of white foam on her nose. Ugly Duckling, if you don't take a good bath, then don't get on my bed from now on. I don't want a stinky guy sleeping next to me, Amy said to Ugly Duckling, who was trying to climb out of the tub, with a serious expression. Ugly Duckling immediately stopped in its tracks. It looked at Amy for a while, and after ascertaining that she was serious, it withdrew its paw, and meowed in a feeble voice, "Meow tilde, that's more like it." Amy nodded with satisfaction. She applied some shower gel on its body, and after rubbing it for a while, she turned to Ugly Duckling with a smile, and said, "Ugly Duckling, why don't you learn to swim? That way, you'll be able to save me if we fall into the water together in the future." Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes immediately widened as if it had heard something incredible. "You're going to be very, very fat in the future. If you fall into the water, I won't be able to save you. But if I fall into the water, I won't be able to fall into the water, because I can fly," Amy with a smug look on her face. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling shook its little head as it slowly retreated with a fearful expression. "Of you, of course. Of course, of course, of course, of you, of course. That's more like it. Swim for me." Meg then watched as a little orange cat began to swim in the bathtub. However, due to its poor technique and lack of experience, it choked on a few mouthfuls of water. However, after learning the dog paddle style, it was able to swim quite well. After blow-drying Ugly Duckling, Meg coaxed Amy to sleep, and then went to the balcony by himself. The early winter nights were already a little cold. Meg wrapped his clothes tightly around himself, and looked up at the starry sky. Sometimes, he would wonder if there was a sun among the countless stars. It had been almost 4 months since he had come to this world. In the beginning, he had been at a loss, but now, he had opened his heart and accepted this world. This was undoubtedly a very special experience for him. Of course, if it weren't for Amy, he probably wouldn't have been able to persist for so long. Perhaps he wouldn't even have the determination to walk out of the test field for the god of cookery. After all, he was such a lazy person. This world wasn't that beautiful. The conflicts between the different races never stopped, and even he couldn't stay out of it. Meg stood silently on the balcony, and looked up at the starry sky. He began to sort out the problems that he had to face next, and the direction that he had to work toward. In 3 months, the peace treaty signed by the Norland continent 100 years ago would expire. Whether the different races chose to renew the treaty would determine whether this relatively peaceful situation could continue to be maintained. Everyone knew that the renewal of the treaty would definitely not go smoothly. After 100 years of recuperation, all the races would have their own ideas, and it would clearly not be easy to reach a consensus. Otherwise, all the races would have made an announcement after the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire, but they didn't. The possibility of an all-out war between species was very low. After all, even the powerful dragon tribe had been severely damaged in the war. However, there would definitely be a lot of local wars. It was very likely that the different races would redistribute their territories according to their power, and many innocent people would still die in the war. With Meg's current power, he naturally couldn't do anything in this matter. Even Alex couldn't do anything in the past. At most, he could make some statements in Alex's name, and let those who made the decisions know the boundaries in their hearts. The restaurant was now on the right track. After the upgrade and expansion today, the turnover should increase significantly. However, he had just spent a huge amount of gold coins to buy 2 strength points from the system. He didn't know when he would be able to earn enough money for the next strength point, so it was also very unlikely that his power would increase drastically in a short period of time. The steam engine had already been handed over to the City Lord's castle and the Buffett Financial Group. It was equivalent to him using his patent to buy a stake in the motorcycle industry, and 20% of the steam engine's other uses. The possibility of mass production and huge profits in a short period of time was also very low. This was especially so for the construction of the railway. This was a bottomless pit. Before a stable transportation channel was formed, who knew how much money he would have to pour into it before he could reap the profits? Compared to the railway, Meg was more optimistic about the steam engine's other uses in the short term. Textiles, machinery, smelting. In all aspects of the industry, the steam engine's application space was very wide. It was a vast blue sea. Efficiency was its strongest competitiveness. Once it entered the mass production stage, it would bring him and Buffett banks incomparably huge profits. Meg was very clear about this from the beginning. If he firmly held the steam engine in his hands and operated it properly, it would not be impossible for him to become the new richest man on the Norland continent. Chapter 9:12. Compared to Alex, who could slay dragons in the sky, catch demons in the sea, or become a business tycoon, Meg preferred his kitchen, which was full of smoke and fire. It was good to watch over the restaurant and Amy, make delicious food for the interesting customers, and listen to their heartfelt praise. He didn't have any big ambitions, not in his previous life, and not in this life. If there was something he really wanted to do now, it would probably be to go to the wind forest and bring Irina to Amy's aboveboard. He could feel that she was indeed very special to him. He didn't know how to express this feeling. They hadn't reached the level of lovers, but there was a kind of longing and anticipation to see her again. Could it be that she's moved? Meg muttered to himself as he looked in the direction of the wind forest. After a moment of silence, he said in his heart, "Just wait, I'll definitely come and get you. Next time, no one will be able to stop me." Meg went downstairs. The second floor had also been opened up, and the area had doubled. After the system's modification, it had completely changed. Mag's room had expanded by a third. There was a soft carpet on the floor, and the big and soft double bed made people want to lie down on it. The one-way floor-to-ceiling window could see the Aden Square. The crib was placed next to the big bed, and Amy was sleeping soundly with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Amy's amusement park had also doubled in size. The originally cramped amusement park was now free, and she could play to her heart's content. There was also a purple-blue starry room next to the master bedroom. This was prepared by Meg for Amy. When Amy grew up, she would definitely have her own room. Now that the house had expanded, there was naturally more space to use. Meg also set up a small study in the corner. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf full of books. The window faced the Bastille prison. This was Meg's request. Facing the somewhat eerie prison, Meg felt that he could think calmly. Now, it really does feel like home. Meg walked around the various rooms, and a smile appeared on his face. However, it seemed that something was missing. He knew, but he didn't want to say it. As the night deepened, there were no longer any pedestrians on the streets of Chaos City. In a quiet courtyard in the north of the city, Elizabeth, who was meditating on the ice bed, suddenly opened her eyes. Her face showed a trace of vigilance. Suddenly, her expression changed. A white snowflake appeared under her body and then disappeared. Almost at the same time, The exquisite little courtyard seemed to have been kneaded inwards by some kind of terrifying power, instantly turning into a pile of broken stones and rotten wood. A loud bang was heard, and the entire street shook along with it. The residents cried out in alarm, and the children burst into tears. For a moment, the entire street was in chaos. Two demons, one tall and one short, appeared on a big tree not far from the small courtyard. They were looking in the direction of the small courtyard. The taller demon was holding a dark crystal ball in his hand. "Is she dead?" the shorter demon asked in a hoarse voice. The taller demon looked at the ball of broken stones and wood for a while with furrowed brows. Suddenly, a burst of red light erupted from his eyes, and he angrily said, "Shit. That bitch got away. Over there." The shorter demon immediately turned around and looked at the figure in the corner. He jumped down from the big tree and rushed toward that alley like a bouncing ball. "We only have 3 minutes. We have to go whether we succeed or not. Otherwise, those guys from the Grey Temple will make us stay here," the taller demon said coldly. He stepped forward and instantly disappeared on the spot. In the next second, he appeared in the alley. He looked at the snowflake-like water stains on the ground, and a disdainful smile appeared on his face. The dark crystal ball in his hand lit up with a hint of red light. It transformed into a light blade, and slashed toward a certain spot in the air. A rift appeared in the air, and a muffled groan sounded. A figure stumbled, and a few drops of blood dripped from it. The rift then closed, and the figure disappeared without a trace. A hint of surprise appeared on the taller demon's face. He furrowed his brows, and stepped forward again. A series of light blades shot out from the dark crystal ball, slashing into the air. A muffled groan sounded from time to time. Who dares to be so presumptuous in Chaos City? At this moment, a muffled voice exploded like thunder, and a flying steed quickly flew in this direction. "Retreat." The taller demon's expression changed slightly, and he instantly landed in a teleportation formation that had been set up in the alley beside the small courtyard. Although the shorter demon was unwilling to give up, he still jumped back into the teleportation formation at the sight of the flying steed. The teleportation formation was activated, and the two demons disappeared in a flash of light. A string of icicles flew down from the sky, and all of them were nailed to the teleportation formation. However, there was no trace of the two demons on it. "These guys are really getting more and more arrogant." The elderly magic caster on the back of a large white bird looked at the small courtyard that had been squashed into a ball, and heaved a sigh of relief after making sure that there was no one inside. He looked at the teleportation formation that had already self-destructed, and couldn't help but grumble to himself in frustration. The elderly magic caster stood on the back of the large white bird, and yelled, "The Grey Temple has arrived. Don't worry, everyone. Dong." Yarbemia was sleeping soundly when she suddenly heard a heavy sound coming from the roof, and she immediately opened her eyes. Did something crash into the roof? Yarbemia opened her eyes in a daze. She was sure that she had heard something crash into the roof. After a moment of hesitation, she turned on the light, put on her clothes, and walked out the door. "MIA, did you hear that too?" Sally asked as soon as Yarbemia walked out the door. "Millimeter. Did you hear it too, Aisha? I think something fell onto the roof. Should we go take a look?" Yarbemia nodded. "Let's go take a look. I don't think it's a bird or anything like that." Sally nodded, and walked toward the door warily. Yarbemia hurriedly followed behind her. Sally slowly opened the door, and her wand was already in her hand. Yarbemia held a frying pan in her hand, and carefully followed behind Sally. The door was completely opened, and Sally saw a figure lying on the stairs. She raised her hand and cast a small illumination spell. "It's her." Chapter 9:13. A hesitant look appeared on Sally's face at the sight of Elizabeth's feeble breathing. She then turned to Yarbemia, and asked, "MIA, are you sure she's a good person?" "I'm sure. Young Mistress Elizabeth is not a bad person." Yarbemia looked up at Sally, and nodded with a determined expression. She pressed a hand over her bleeding wounds in a panic, and said in an urgent voice, "Please save her, Aisha. She's losing a lot of blood." Sally hesitated momentarily at the sight of Yarbemia's frantic expression, but she still cast a healing spell in the end. Green light fell upon Elizabeth's body, and her bleeding wounds quickly healed and scabbed over. A hint of color returned to her pale face. 10 minutes later, Sally withdrew her wand, and the green light receded. All that was left of Elizabeth's wounds were faint scars. Her face was still a little pale, but her breathing had stabilized, and she was no longer as feeble as before. "That's great, Aisha." Yarbemia was elated. She crouched down and carefully picked up Elizabeth before turning to walk into her room. "Mia, are you going to take her in?" Sally stood at the door with a perplexed look on her face. "She hasn't woken up yet, and it's so cold right now. If we leave her outside, she'll catch a cold." Mia nodded in response. Sally remained standing at the door, and looked at Elizabeth as she said, "She's a 7th-tier frost dragon. The person who injured her to this extent must be at least 8th tier or above. If they come here, we won't be able to deal with them. But we can't just leave her here. She's just a little girl." Yarbemia looked into Sally's eyes, and a smile appeared on her face as she said, "If it's possible, I'd like to keep her here until she wakes up." Sally was silent for a moment before stepping aside to allow Yarbemia into the room. "Thank you, Aisha," Yarbemia said gratefully as she carried Elizabeth, whose clothes were stained with blood, into the house and walked towards her own room. "Such a kind child." Sally sighed helplessly. She waved her hand, and a stream of water washed the blood off the door and the roof. She stood on the roof and watched for a while before returning to the house. When they walked past Yarbemia's room, Sally saw that she was carefully wiping Elizabeth's body with a hot towel. She hesitated for a moment before swallowing her words. Although this frost dragon was a little suspicious, nothing bad had happened during the few times it had been alone with Mia. And in this room, besides her, Barbara was also a 7th-level magician. Even if she really had bad intentions, she would still hesitate to take action. The wounds on her body suggested that she had been inflicted by demons, and the evil aura emanating from her body wasn't fake. However, what had happened to her? Why did those demons dare to attack a giant dragon in Chaos City? Weren't they afraid of incurring the wrath of a giant dragon? Yarbemia poured away the 3rd basin of hot water, and the blood on Elizabeth's body was finally wiped clean. She hurriedly helped her change into her own clothes. Although they were a little short, they still managed to fit her. What happened to young Mistress Elizabeth? How did she get so severely injured? Yarbemia sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Elizabeth with a concerned expression. She looked on and on like this, and fell asleep before she knew it. The next morning, Elizabeth opened her eyes in a daze. She suddenly thought of the demons and the attack, and her eyes flew open. At the same time, she wanted to jump up. However, what she saw when she opened her eyes wasn't a terrifying demon. Instead, she saw a world of pink. She was lying on a soft bed, and a feathery but very warm blanket that covered her body. It was so comfortable that she didn't want to get up. "What's this?" Elizabeth faltered slightly, and didn't know what was going on. She had been attacked by a 9th-tier spatial demon and an 8th-tier demon in quick succession, and had completely lost consciousness after using her frost domain to teleport. She had thought that she wouldn't be able to escape with her severe injuries, but who would have thought that she would be lying on a warm bed after waking up? Elizabeth looked around with a wary expression, and then her gaze fell on Yarbemia, who was still sleeping on the edge of the bed. How could it be her? Elizabeth's eyes widened with shock. However, her gaze gradually softened at the sight of Yarbemia, who was sleeping on the edge of the bed. It could be seen that she had sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before finally falling asleep. "Did she save me?" Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia, who was lying on her side. Her long eyelashes were trembling slightly, and her intricate features were so adorable. This was the first time that she had seen her face up close, and she was sleeping like a little child. However, Elizabeth quickly realized something. She lifted the blanket and looked down. Her expression suddenly became strange. The pink pajamas she was wearing were obviously shorter, but the size was still quite fitting. It was soft and comfortable to wear on her body. All of the wounds on her body had already healed, leaving only a series of faint scars. To giant dragons, scars were nothing more than medals, so she didn't care about them at all. "But why am I here?" Could it be that I was teleported here during the last teleportation? Elizabeth was still a little perplexed, but thinking about it carefully, she seemed to be the only person in this massive chaos city that she could trust. Looks like Fox is already itching to kill me. Last night's assassination was only the beginning. Will I still be alive next time? In that case, should I hand over the Golden Dragon origin to you now? Elizabeth stared blankly at Yarbemia with a perplexed expression. Yarbemia had also woken up, and her eyes met with Elizabeth's as an elated expression appeared on her face. You're awake, young Mistress Elizabeth? Are you feeling better? You lost a lot of blood last night, and I was so worried about you. It's great that you're awake. I'm fine now. Elizabeth came to her senses, and a hint of panic flashed through her eyes. However, she looked at Yarbemia's concerned gaze, and a warm feeling welled up in her heart. Ever since her mother had passed away, no one had looked at her with such concern in this world. Thank you for last night, she said in a gentle voice. Chapter 9:14. My God, did Mammoth expand? It's only been a day, and it's already doubled in size. Mr. Mac is way too efficient. He completed the upgrade in just a day, and I didn't hear anything about it before. Mr. Mac is really generous. Normally, a restaurant's upgrade would take at least half a month off, but Mr. Mac only took a day off to complete it. He must have hired a magician's construction team, right? He must have spent a lot of money on this. That's not important. What's important is that the restaurant has been expanded, so it should be able to receive customers better, right? The leaders have been coming here for short meetings every day, and I've already been unable to line up for dinner a few times. The customers lining up outside Mammoth in the morning quickly noticed that the restaurant was different. Even though the curtains were lowered, they could tell from the door in the middle that Mammoth had indeed been expanded. Today's new dish is Peking duck, 100 roast ducks per night, limited to 1 per person. Only allowed for in-house meals, no takeouts. Soon, another customer noticed a new notice hanging on the door. What kind of roast duck is Peking duck? Is Peking duck a new roast duck invented by Mr. Mac? Why haven't I heard of it before? The roast duck from Duca's restaurant isn't bad either. It's crispy and delicious, but you can't eat too much of it. It's a little too sweet, but if you don't add sugar, it's a little lacking in flavor. I wonder what Mr. Mac's roast duck tastes like. In any case, I'm going to line up early tonight. After all, Mr. Mac can even make stinky tofu, so how can I miss out on the limited edition of 100 roast ducks? But 1 whole duck is going to be a lot, so I'll have to bring someone with me. The customers also began to discuss among themselves as they looked at the notice. Roast duck. Father, did you catch new ducks? Amy asked nervously when she heard that she would be able to eat roast ducks tonight. Someone else caught them. I'm just going to make roast ducks with them. Meg shook his head with a smile. Last time, Tang Wulin had secretly released the 2 tricolor ducks, so he wondered if it would release the other ducks this time. However, the system had already prepared a processed duck for him. This time, he couldn't release it even if he wanted to. Amy made her way over to Ugly Duckling, which was napping on the counter, and whispered, "Then let's be careful when we eat. Don't let Ugly Duckling see us. Otherwise, it'll be very sad. After all, its siblings might be there, and if we scare it, it might run away." Okay. Meg held back his laughter and nodded. Sure enough, a foodie would never make the same mistake twice. The roast duck stove was ready, and the roast ducks were ready to be served. The cost of 1 roast duck was 500 copper coins, so Meg naturally set the price at 20,000 copper coins. Selling 100 roast ducks a day could earn him 150,000 copper coins, which was much faster than selling Yangju fried rice. As for sales, Meg wasn't worried at all. This was a dish that even someone as picky as him couldn't forget, so there was no reason why it wouldn't be popular. Then can we have roast duck for breakfast? Amy asked as she turned to Meg with an expectant look in her eyes. We have to eat something light in the morning, so we'll have to wait until noon. Meg shook his head with a smile. Tang Wulin was a good girl, but she was a little impatient. All right. Amy nodded. Even though she was a little disappointed, she didn't express any displeasure at all. Boss, I'm here. Phyllis knocked on the door. Meg opened the door to find Phyllis standing there in a brand new chef suit. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her breathing was a little unsteady. She looked at Meg with an apologetic expression as she said, "I'm sorry, boss, but the bed is too soft." "Am I late?" Meg looked at his watch and nodded as he said, "You're 15 minutes later than we agreed on yesterday. However, it's your first day at work, so it's normal that you're not used to it. I hope you'll be more punctual next time." "Yes, I will." Phyllis nodded earnestly with a blush on her face. Before going to bed last night, she had decided that she had to arrive early today, but she didn't expect that she would oversleep and run all the way here. Meg stepped aside to let Phyllis in with a smile as he said, "Come on in. As long as everything goes smoothly, you shouldn't be too late." As a boss, he couldn't just spoil his employees. Being punctual was the most basic of all. The restaurant was very crowded at the moment, and if someone couldn't be punctual, it could greatly affect the restaurant's normal operations. "All right." Phyllis hurriedly entered, and was stunned to see that the restaurant had completely changed. She hadn't been here for a day, but the restaurant had doubled in size. There were even wooden fences that reached up to her chest separating the rows of tables. There were small bottles of green plants hanging on the fences, and the comfortable warm lights made her feel warm and comfortable. "Good morning, Big Sister Phyllis," Amy said with a smile as she pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face. "Good morning, Amy." Phyllis came to her senses and greeted Amy before hurriedly catching up with Meg, who was almost at the entrance of the kitchen. Standing at the entrance of the kitchen, Phyllis was stunned again. If the previous kitchen was said to be the pinnacle of a one-man kitchen, then Meg was like a master of a generation. However, there was no second person who could integrate into the kitchen as that would break the harmony. However, the current kitchen was even more grand and spacious. It had more than doubled in size, and the kitchen utensils had been rearranged. The sink, the cutting area, the cooking area. All of the areas had also become more spacious, and it wouldn't be crowded even if 3 or 4 chefs were to work here at the same time. The white lights weren't glaring, but at this moment, the kitchen was a little dazzling in Phyllis's eyes. "This is a real kitchen." Phyllis's heart was screaming. She suddenly felt that the kitchen that she was so proud of didn't even deserve to be called a kitchen in comparison. Meg turned to Phyllis and said, "These are the ingredients that we'll be using today. I'll process some of them, and you can take care of the rest. Due to the expansion of the restaurant, I need to increase the efficiency of my cooking. If I need new ingredients later, you have to prepare them for me." "Huh? Yes, I'll do my best." Phyllis faltered slightly before immediately coming to her senses. She quickly strode into the kitchen, washed her hands, and began to process the ingredients. Chapter 9:15. It was a misty morning in the wind forest. In a luxurious hall, a middle-aged elf looked at Borge with a worried expression, and said, "Master Borge, Irina and those mysterious guys killed all of the mercenaries who were escorting the elves, and we lost over 100 slaves. Yesterday, Alex destroyed a mercenary group with an 8th-tier powerhouse in Chaos City. I'm afraid it's going to be even more difficult for us to get more slaves. Even though Alex has died once, he's still as annoying as he was back then." Borge's expression darkened as he sat on a tall chair. He crushed a cup in his hand, and said in a low voice, "Raise the bounty, and warn those guys not to sell the slaves to other places. If we find out, they'll pay a heavy price. Elves can only be sold to the wind forest. If anyone forgets, get someone to remind them." "Yes." The elf's expression changed, and he bowed before quickly departing. "How long can the Tree of Life last? I'm really looking forward to that power. When that time comes, the wind forest will have to crawl at my feet, including that noble queen." Borge raised his hand, and a ball of green flames danced in his palm. A series of greenish-black patterns spread down his arm and reached his wrist. "Alex, I'll kill you with my own hands." Borge's eyes suddenly turned crimson, and the flickering shadows in the flames made him look like the shadow of a demon. The cave where the Tree of Life was located was still covered by a pale green light curtain. The spring that usually gushed out the spring of life had completely dried up, and the surrounding trees had lost some of their green color. They no longer had the vitality of the past. The elven Holy Land had become a forbidden area. Elves were told not to approach this place, or they would be punished. There were only 2 teams of elven guards patrolling the area. After the Elven Queen went into seclusion, a series of changes occurred in the elven race. Princess Irina was stripped of her position as the princess, but her words were like a seed that had taken root in the hearts of the young elves. During this period of time, many young masters and young ladies of noble families had been beaten and confined. Although the news that spread was that they had made small mistakes and were punished lightly, everyone knew in their hearts what the reason was. Some changes that made the adults uneasy were happening, and it was the successor that they had painstakingly cultivated. The cave of the Tree of Life was as quiet as ever. Without Firis, it was even quieter than before. Irina was still sitting under the Tree of Life in a long white dress. Her eyes were closed, and she was in a state of meditation. A green beam of light rose from her body, and connected with the Tree of Life. However, at this time, there were dark green cracks on the trunk of the Tree of Life. They spread from the roots and occupied almost half of the height. Traces of dark green aura were emitted from the cracks and continued to spread upward. The tens of thousands of drooping tender green branches were now a little more yellow, no longer exuding vitality. However, the Tree of Life's powerful life force and the green beam of light that Irina had injected into the Tree of Life were still resisting, and a balance was reached. Borg has indeed betrayed the God of Life and allied himself with the undead. How dare he touch the Tree of Life? After a long while, Irina opened her eyes. The light on her body gradually faded. She needed a short rest to recover some of her spiritual power. Bean sprout, I want a cup of. Irina said casually, but then she suddenly stopped. She looked at the empty cave, and shook her head with a smile. The little guy that she had picked up when he was little, and had never left the Wind Forest until now, was probably in Chaos City right now. With Meg taking care of him, she was quite relieved. Irina looked up at the Tree of Life, and sighed. Hang in there, old friend. If you fall, the entire elven race will be finished. The God of Life won't protect the elves who have been tainted by the undead. You are the bottom line. The withered yellow branch swayed slightly in response to Irina's words. A smile appeared on Irina's face. She got up and walked around the cave before sitting down again. She closed her eyes, and softly said, Rest for an hour, and then we'll continue to expel those undead auras. I've already found some tricks. Those guys are far more afraid of the holy light than the power of life. That tree isn't producing water of life anymore. Isn't that hindering my farming? I need a lot of rice of life every day. The current stock can only last for 3 months at most. A batch of early maturing rice takes 2 months from planting to harvesting, so I have to get it to produce water again within a month. Those things are so annoying. If it weren't for the fact that the heavenly Tao doesn't allow them to affect the normal development of the world, I would have destroyed them all with a beam of gamma rays so that they wouldn't affect my farming and earning money. In the depths of Meg's mind, the system was mumbling to itself, but no one could hear it. Although I can't do it directly, it shouldn't be a problem to fertilize the tree, right? As a master chef cultivation system, my mission is to assist the host to become a successful master chef. If I can't guarantee the supply of the rice of life, the dish Yangju fried rice will be completely ruined. This is something that can never happen. Yes, this is completely in line with the 3 laws of the system. Expelling the undead aura is not something a system can do. But now, let's analyze the composition of these guys. As long as they exist, they can be explained by science. If they can't be explained, then it must be because science isn't developed enough. Phyllis once again demonstrated her superb knife skills. The flying ingredients were quickly turned into spare ingredients of the same size with the help of the Chinese kitchen knife. Meg didn't stay idle either. In addition to cutting the ingredients, he also had to prepare many ingredients himself, such as the sauce for the beef kebab and the marinating of the beef. However, compared to usual, Meg's workload had been reduced by more than half, which made him very satisfied. Not long after, Sally and Yarbemia also came to the restaurant. Chapter 9:16. Yarbemia looked at Meg with a hesitant expression. Meg stopped what he was doing and looked at Yarbemia seriously. It seemed that something really did happen last night. Sally also looked at MIA, but she didn't say anything. Yarbemia looked at everyone's concerned expressions and hesitated for a moment before shaking her head with a smile. It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well and had a nightmare. Mag took a meaningful look at Yarbemia before nodding, and saying, all right, then. If you need any help, make sure to let us know. You don't have to open the ice cream shop today. Go back and get some sleep after the morning service. Okay. Mia nodded with a smile. She felt a warmth in her heart as she thought to herself, although I don't know what kind of enemy Miss Elizabeth has provoked, it's best not to let Boss and the rest worry. She can't get out of bed now, so I'll bring something back for her after the morning opening hours. What a naive little girl. I hope that Frost Dragon isn't a bad person. Sally looked at MIA and sighed in her heart. MIA stood at the entrance of the kitchen and asked curiously, by the way, Boss, the notice outside said that you'll be releasing a new dish today, Peking duck. When did you come up with a new dish? But where is the duck? Everyone looked at Meg. They were just as curious as the customers in the line outside. Every time Meg released a new dish, it would completely overturn everyone's expectations. Therefore, every new dish he released was very curious. Yes, the duck is still on the way. The Peking duck will be officially released tonight. It's a little inappropriate to eat it in the morning, so I'll make a roast duck for everyone to try at noon. Meg nodded with a smile. It was better to eat something light in the morning. No matter how good the roast duck was, it wasn't suitable for breakfast. The happiest thing about being a waitress at Mammoth's is to be able to eat a new dish first every time. MIA clasped her hands with a blissful expression. She then looked at Meg with a smile and said, Boss, next time when you come up with a new dish, I can try it for you. I can eat anything. Smiles appeared on everyone's faces. This was probably something that everyone had dreamed of. Even I don't have the courage to try my dishes. Meg shook his head with a smile. Besides, I can eat a lot of them. A burst of laughter in the restaurant. Even Sally couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand and giggled. Phyllis, who was still cutting vegetables in the kitchen, saw this scene. She couldn't help but look at Meg. She suddenly felt very lucky. Whether it was Princess Irina or Boss Meg, they didn't bully her because of her identity and status. Such a relaxed and pleasant working environment was completely unimaginable in the Wind Forest. Of course, Miss Sally, who had been nominated as a candidate for the princess, volunteered to be a waitress here. Now that Princess Irina had been abolished, Miss Sally was the most likely to become the new princess. Everyone thought she was cultivating in seclusion in the Brewster family, but she was actually in Chaos City. Sally also took a glance at Phyllis. She had disguised herself the day before to gather some information, and she was caught off guard by the drastic changes that had taken place in the elven race. She had initially wanted to have a chat with Phyllis the day before, but Phyllis had locked herself in her room for the entire day. Princess Irina had been dethroned, and the Elven Queen was in seclusion. Now, in the Wind Forest, one party led by the most powerful general, Borge, and the other party led by High Priestess Helena were in a power struggle. Although the possibility of a civil war wasn't high, it was very likely that a new princess would be elected, and she might have to leave Chaos City and return to the Wind Forest. The two looked at each other, and then silently looked away. During breakfast, Yarbemia stood and bit into a Ruggiamo. After a moment of hesitation, she looked at Meg and said, Boss, can I have a sweet tofu pudding to take away later? Sweet tofu pudding? Meg looked at MIA with surprise. This girl had always only eaten savory tofu pudding. Now, she had betrayed him and become a sweet fan. Meg couldn't help but forget about the other important thing, which was to take it away. I want to try sweet tofu pudding today, but I'm still a savory fan. But as a savory fan, if I don't try sweet tofu pudding, I won't be able to say anything more convincing, right? Maybe that's what it is. Yarbemia's eyes darted around as she tried to come up with an excuse that sounded convincing to her. Meg nodded with a smile and said, Okay, I'll save a portion for you later, and then you can take it away. Seeing this girl trying so hard to make up a lie, he didn't have the heart to expose her. Something did happen last night, but MIA didn't want to talk about it, so he didn't ask. Everyone in this world had secrets. He was just a boss, and didn't have a strong desire for knowledge and control. "Thank you, boss," Mia said happily with a happy expression. After breakfast, Meg stood up and looked at everyone with a smile, and said, "The restaurant is limited to 400 people this morning, and the number of diners has increased by 100. The opening hours are the same, which means that the workload has increased by a third, so we need to be more efficient and work harder. I hope everyone can work hard. I'm sure we can do it well." Mia nodded with confidence. Sally and Barbara's eyes were also burning with fighting spirit. They had been able to do their job well before, but now that the number of customers had increased, they had to take it seriously. "Is there anything I can help with?" Phyllis, who was sitting in a corner and didn't have much of a presence, asked meekly. "You'll be in charge of helping in the kitchen. When you learn how to make beef kebabs, you'll be busy," Meg said with a smile. The increase in the number of diners was undoubtedly a big surprise to the customers who arrived late. Many of the customers who had been waiting outside of the 300th place line happily continued to line up. "Welcome to Mammoth." Meg pushed open the door and smiled at the customers who were waiting in line. Mammoth had changed its appearance, and it was displayed to all the customers. "Wow, it's so much bigger, and there's even a little more partitioning. There's no section, and it's even more tuned. Mr. Mac is really a genius. I didn't expect this kind of flower to be nourished with water. But this little crystal vase must be super expensive, right? It's just hanging here like a vase." Chapter 9:17. On a mountain 5 kilometers away from Chaos City, a giant jade-top falcon landed quietly. Two figures stood on the top of the mountain, looking in the direction of Chaos City. A middle-aged elf looked at Elliot worriedly, and said, "Chief, you've come to Chaos City in person. If the other families know about this, it'll be hard to explain." Elliot shook his head with a grave expression, and said, "Aside from me, who else can bring Sally back? The most important thing now is not to worry about those guys attacking me for coming to Chaos City. Instead, it's to think of a way to bring Sally back and make her the new elven princess. That's the only way the Brewster family can survive the coming chaos." The middle-aged elf wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he sighed deeply and didn't say anything. "Wait for me here. I'll bring her back before sunset tomorrow. Don't provoke anyone, and keep a low profile." Elliot gave the middle-aged elf some instructions, and then appeared at the foot of the mountain in a flash. He quickly flew toward Chaos City. An increase of 100 customers might not seem like a big deal at first, but when the restaurant doubled in size due to the already tight operating hours and the addition of 100 customers, the workload was not as simple as increasing by 1/3. Even with the help of magic, the 3 people running back and forth between the restaurant and the kitchen still felt that their legs and hands were no longer their own. After breakfast, Harrison smiled at Meg, who was cooking in the kitchen, and said, "Mr. Mac, I think you should hire a few more waitresses. Look at how tired the girls are. How can you be so cruel to them? If possible, I'd like to hire 2 more chefs." Meg rolled his eyes. He shook the wok slightly, and the young Jew fried rice in the wok jumped out like a rainbow. If he hadn't leveled up twice in the past 2 days and improved his strength, he wouldn't have been able to handle this amount of work. "1 person. Mr. Mac, you win." Harrison poked his head into the kitchen to take a look. In such a huge kitchen, there was enough food for 400 people, but it was all made by Mag alone. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue. When this chap decided to be ruthless, he would even exploit himself. He had nothing to say. After the morning opening hours, Meg rotated his sore wrist and looked at the tired girls lying on the chairs outside. He couldn't help but smile. His conscience wouldn't be at ease if he didn't give them a raise. "Here's a warm towel for you." Meg was still thinking about how much he should give them when a hot towel was handed to him. Meg was stunned for a moment. Looking at Phyllis, who was holding the towel with both hands, he hurriedly took it and nodded. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Phyllis ran out of the kitchen with the rest of the towels and handed them to Mia and Sally. "What a kind girl." Meg withdrew his gaze and covered his face with the hot towel. The steam from the towel swept away all his tiredness. It was so comfortable that he wanted to close his eyes and sleep. A hot towel relieved a lot of everyone's tiredness, and they looked at Phyllis with more gratitude and affection. Well, I'll leave now. I'll leave the rest to you guys. Yarbemia helped put all the dishes into the kitchen. She picked up the sweet tofu pudding that Meg had packed for her and was about to leave. MIA, here's a plate of Yeongju fried rice. I made too much just now. You can take it with you. Meg stopped her and handed her a lunchbox with a smile. Mia turned back to look at the lunchbox in Mag's hand. Her eyes were already slightly red. She went forward to receive the lunchbox, and then bowed deeply to the buyer. She choked up a little as she said, "Thank you, boss. Go on. Go back and have a good sleep, but remember to set an alarm. Don't miss the lunch service," Mag urged as he stroked Mia's hair with a smile. "Okay, I'll remember." MIA nodded. She picked up the lunchbox and walked quickly out of the door. Mag looked at the fatigued Sally and Barbara with a smile, and said, "You two should get some rest as well. It's time for me to think about how to recruit a few more exceptional employees. It's not good to let beauties work so hard. Then I'm afraid it'll be hard to find them." Barbara curled her lips. "I agree." Meg nodded in agreement. After all, there weren't that many 7th-tier spatial magic casters in this world who could be tricked into working as waiters with beef kebabs. However, Meg urgently needed to think about this problem seriously. He had to accept the fact that Sally could be taken away by the Brewster family at any time. As someone who had experienced it himself, he knew how important Sally was in the current situation of the elven race. As long as the leader of the Brewster family wasn't an idiot and didn't know that Sally was in Chaos City, then it was very likely that he was already on his way to Chaos City. If Sally suddenly left, Amy's would be in a state of sudden suspension. Therefore, he had to think of a solution now. It wasn't difficult to find a 7th-tier water magic caster in Chaos City, but Mag didn't think he had the ability to poach a 7th-tier water magic caster from the Grey Temple or some veteran mercenary group to work as a waiter in his restaurant. Therefore, this was a very troublesome matter. Of course, there was still a solution. He could find a slightly weaker water-type magic caster, but at the very least, he would be able to clean the entire restaurant. Then, he could find a cashier who was good at arithmetic, and 2 waiters who were more agile to clean up the dishes. That should be enough to fill Sally's vacancy. Now that I think about it, am I really an evil capitalist who exploits people? Meg raised an eyebrow. He was still a little troubled. The restaurant would become a little messy when there were too many people. This was a problem he didn't want to see, but he had to solve it. All right. Looks like I have to talk to that Mediterranean boss more often during this period of time. At least, I have to find a few reliable ones, Mag thought to himself with resignation. Meg suddenly looked at Phyllis. He walked to the counter, took out a few gold coins, and handed them to Phyllis. "By the way, Phyllis, go to the market and buy some beef today. Bring it back and continue to practice your beef kebabs according to what I taught you yesterday." "Aye." Phyllis was a little hesitant, but she quickly nodded when she saw Meg's eyes. She clutched the gold coins tightly and walked out. After cleaning up the restaurant, Sally and Barbara also left the restaurant to rest. They weren't used to the workload in the morning, so they needed to rest. Meg went upstairs to change his clothes. He was about to go to the job market. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Luna standing outside. She was about to knock on the door. "Teacher Luna, why are you here?" Meg asked in surprise. Chapter 9:18. A Parent-Teacher Conference. Meg faltered slightly upon hearing this. He suddenly recalled that Amy had mentioned a parent-teacher conference to him the day before yesterday, but he had completely forgotten about it due to his busy schedule. Furthermore, Amy was currently studying magic with Crassus and Julian, so he didn't think that Luna would be the one to notify him. Luna seemed to have detected the confusion in Meg's eyes, and she smiled as she said, "That's right. The students of Chaos School have to hold a parent-teacher conference every semester. Amy is currently studying magic with 2 magic casters, but the school assigned her to my class as her homeroom teacher, so I'm here to notify you that you'll be attending the parent-teacher conference tomorrow." Meg immediately nodded, and said, "I see. Thank you, Teacher Luna. What time will the conference be held tomorrow? I'll be sure to be there on time. The exact time will be between 1:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. tomorrow. Luna looked at Meg with a hesitant expression, and said, the school wants both parents of your child to be present at the parent-teacher conference. Meg looked at Luna's hesitant expression with a smile, and said, Amy has also mentioned this to me before, but I didn't receive any specific notice, so I can take care of it. Luna looked at the smile on Meg's face, and felt an inexplicable sense of security. A smile also appeared on her face, and she nodded as she said, all right, Mr. Meg, I'll see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Meg nodded with a smile. Aisha won't refuse, right? If she refuses, then it doesn't seem right for Phyllis to go. But no matter what, it's better than Blower. Meg murmured to himself as he looked at Luna's departing figure. Meg, who was about to go to the talent market with his bicycle, suddenly stopped. He rubbed his eyebrows and said, I almost forgot that the Catering Association's gourmet ranking competition is going to start in 2 or 3 days. We have to figure out the eggplant with garlic sauce as soon as possible. Otherwise, the vegetarian category will be useless. System, why don't you give me a recipe for eggplant with garlic sauce? Meg tried asking in his mind. The system is in closed-door cultivation to research fertilizer. Please do not disturb. A line of words silently floated across Meg's mind. Meg, I don't believe you. Meg cursed silently in his heart. He rode his bicycle and went to the talent market. There were all kinds of people from different races, and he was a little dazzled by them. However, he didn't see a single one that he liked. When he came out of the talent market, Meg had already recognized a fact: he was also someone who cared about appearances. Even if he was innocent. However, when he looked at the cleaning ladies who were slightly inferior in terms of looks, he couldn't make up his mind to hire them to Mammoth. On the way, Meg went to the Broad recruitment agency. He found the owner of Two Pieces, Chris, and asked him to help him find a suitable candidate. Even though he was feeling as if he had suffered a loss from the previous transaction, Chris was still a smooth and slick businessman. He didn't express any displeasure toward Mag in the slightest, and he followed all of the necessary procedures. However, Mag's demands were quite complex and demanding, so he asked for double the commission. As long as I'm satisfied with the person, double the commission won't be an issue. Meg nodded with a smile. With the popularity of your restaurant, Mr. Mack, if you put up a recruitment notice on the door, I'm sure many people will come to apply. Chris accepted the letter of entrustment with a smile. That's a good idea. Meg's eyes lit up, and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. There were many customers who said they would work for free as long as they were given a meal, and there were many outstanding talents among them. Chris's suggestion opened up a new line of thought for Meg. He patted Chris on the shoulder with a smile, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chris." Then, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Chris's expression completely froze. He looked at Meg's back as he rode away on his bicycle, and he wanted to slap himself. Why did he say that? After that, Mag went to the market. There were eggplants in this world, too. However, compared to the eggplants on Earth, the ones on the Norland continent were larger. They were about the size of a winter melon. It was said that they had been discovered in the territory of the forest trolls. Apart from their size, they tasted just like the eggplants on Earth. This grilled eggplant should be enough for a table of people. Meg picked up a large purple eggplant from a stall on the ground. It weighed over 12 kilograms, and he was stunned. The middle-aged man who was leaning against a rattan chair was immediately energized when he saw Meg carrying the eggplant. He smiled, and said, "Young man, this is an eggplant that I grew in my own house. It's definitely the largest eggplant in our village, and it's cheap too. It's only 10 copper coins for such a large eggplant. If you want more, I can give you a lower price. Less than a copper coin per kilogram. It's really cheap." Mag thought to himself. However, due to the limitations of cooking methods, other species, apart from the forest trolls, generally stayed away from eggplants, which were soft and had a strange taste. This was also the reason why this old farmer had a small mountain of eggplants in front of him, but it was almost unmarketable. Meg picked 3 eggplants that looked good, and handed 3 silver coins to the owner. I don't want too many, so I'll take these 3. I'll come back next time. Buy some more. If you buy 5 eggplants, you'll get 1 free. The owner took the money and tied the 3 eggplants up with a straw rope for Meg as he continued to sell them. It seemed that even the forest trolls didn't like eggplants this year. This made him very worried, and now he was trying to sell as many eggplants as he could. He couldn't let them all rot in the field. I'll come back tomorrow. Meg shook his head and left with the 3 eggplants, which weighed over 40 kilograms. These were enough for him to try cooking today. The most important thing now was to make the bean paste. The bean paste played a crucial role in determining the authenticity of a dish of eggplant with garlic sauce. A good bean paste was half the battle won. When Meg was buying spices, he happened to see Phyllis, who was still pacing back and forth in front of the beef stall. Seeing her carefully selecting the beef, he didn't greet her. Instead, he watched her for a while and went back with the eggplants and spices. Choosing and purchasing ingredients was a very important ability, and also the foundation of becoming a chef. Phyllis had to master it independently. Chapter 9:19. Meg was constantly trying to make the bean paste, while Phyllis was also trying her best to grill a kebab. In the quiet kitchen, only the occasional sigh of the two could be heard. But soon, the two of them were immersed in their next failure. In this regard, the two of them found a trace of similarity. So behind every delicious dish, there is a process of continuous improvement. Becoming an excellent chef is not an easy thing. I also have to continue to work hard, Phyllis thought to herself as she stole a glance at Meg. At noon, Meg started the fire and roasted Mammoth's first roast duck. There were 2 thin plates of lotus leaf pancakes, several long and small plates with thin strips of scallion and cucumber, and a plate of sweet sauce in front of everyone. Everything looked so delicate and exquisite, making people look forward to it even more. There were no other dishes on the table. Everyone sat at the table and looked in the direction of the kitchen, full of expectation. The most anticipated moment was naturally the moment when a new dish was brought to the table, and they would be the first to witness and taste it. Meg slowly walked out of the kitchen with a small dining cart. There were several exquisite plates on the cart, a round wooden chopping board with a heavy Chinese kitchen knife on it, and a large plate with a metal lid in the middle. It stopped at the table. Everyone's eyes fell on the large plate with a lid. They had seen Meg working for a long time, but they had all kinds of guesses as to what the roast duck looked like. But what they wanted to see the most was what Meg made. Peking duck, Meg said with a smile, and then gently lifted the metal lid. Under the lid was a plump, bright red roast duck with a slightly oily surface. A complete duck was roasted so beautifully that everyone's eyes couldn't help but light up. The roast duck that had just been taken out of the oven was still steaming hot, and a rich aroma came with the heat. It was a mouth-watering smell. Gulp. Everyone's throat moved uncontrollably. It smells so good. This aroma is completely different from that of beef kebabs, but it's also so fragrant that I'm salivating, Yabemia exclaimed after taking a deep whiff of the aroma. Father, there's only one roast duck, but there are so many of us. How are we going to split it? Amy looked at Meg with a troubled expression. Everyone turned to look at Meg. One roast duck was supposed to be shared among 6 people, so how to cut it became a problem. Roast duck is 70% roasted and 30% sliced. Therefore, slicing the duck is a very important process. Meg said with a smile. He put on a pair of thin disposable gloves, lifted the roast duck from the big plate, and placed it on the chopping board. He held the kitchen knife and made a cut on the duck breast. With a light flick of his wrist, thin pieces of duck meat fell neatly on the chopping board. The duck meat was lean with a hint of fat, and the duck skin was golden yellow. After cutting it open, it had beautiful texture. All of them were sliced into the shape of apricot leaves. They were almost the same size, and there was no difference in thickness. They were as light as leaves, and they were stacked in an orderly manner on the chopping board. The cumbersome kitchen knife appeared to be very nimble in Meg's hands. The crispy duck skin and tender duck meat didn't affect the stability of the kitchen knife in the slightest. Under his knife, the entire duck was quickly sliced into pieces according to its different parts, and placed on different plates in a smooth and fluid manner. Amy's eyes widened as she stared intently at the plates of roast duck meat. The light in her eyes made it seem as if she was about to pounce on them. What incredible knife skills! Phyllis's mouth was also slightly agape, and her eyes were filled with amazement. Without the aid of any magic, and with only pure knife skills, the roast duck that had just been taken out of the oven had been sliced into such a thin and uniform piece. She was truly in awe. Even if she had the assistance of wind magic, she probably wouldn't be able to do it as well or as quickly as Meg. Sally and Yarbemia also couldn't hide their amazement. The roast duck's alluring color was sliced apart by Meg's knife, and the entire process seemed to have given the duck a soul. Looking at the uniform thickness of the duck meat on the plates and smelling the fragrance in the air, they felt as if they could already taste the enticing taste of the duck meat once it entered their mouths. Their expectations were raised to the extreme. 108 slices. Meg put down the duck rack in his hands, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the 5 plates of duck meat that were perfectly filled. Slicing a duck into 108 slices was the perfect number of slices. Only an experienced duck slicer could achieve this. The thickness of the duck slices was just right, and it was also one of the projects that Meg had spent the most time on in the test space for the god of cookery. Slicing roast duck was truly a work of skill. "Father, can we start eating now?" Amy asked as she looked at Meg expectantly. "Of course, but before we start eating, I have to tell everyone how to eat roast duck." Meg looked at the impatient Amy with a doting expression. The roast duck meat can be eaten directly, or you can dip it in the sweet sauce in front of you. Of course, the most classic way to eat it is to dip the duck meat in the sweet sauce, add some green onions and cucumbers, and wrap it in a layer of lotus pancake. Everyone's eyes fell on the sweet sauce and green onions in front of them, as well as the lotus pancake on the bamboo plate. They didn't know that these things could be used in such a way. They didn't think that eating roast duck would require so much attention. "Everyone is hungry, so let's start eating," Meg said with a smile as he looked at everyone, who had already swallowed countless mouthfuls of saliva. "Okay." Amy was the first to reach out with her chopsticks. She picked up a piece of duck meat with trembling hands, and put it into her mouth. A blissful expression instantly crept onto her delicate little face. The delicacy melted in her mouth. It was the taste of bliss. So this is what roast duck tastes like. Then, roast goose must taste similar, right? It's so delicious. Amy said happily as she opened her eyes. "I want to try it too." Yarbemia picked up a piece of duck meat and carefully dipped it in the sweet sauce in front of her. Then, she put it into her mouth and gently bit into it. The duck meat that had just been sliced was still piping hot, and the skin was crispy. Meanwhile, the lean duck meat with a hint of fat was exceptionally rich and mellow. A fruity aroma slowly spread from the duck meat, and the sweet sauce's aroma began to spread, raising the deliciousness of the dish to another level. Yarbemia closed her eyes at some point. She seemed to see the duck slowly being roasted into a golden red color in the fruit charcoal. A drop of oil seeped out of the duck, then slowly slid down the golden red skin and dripped into the charcoal fire, raising a small flame. Chapter 9:20. Yarbemia opened his eyes and exclaimed, "Is this really a roast duck? I don't smell any rank odor. The crispy duck skin and the smooth duck meat don't seem to belong to the same duck at all. This taste is simply unbelievable. Then let me try to wrap the duck in a lotus leaf cake." Sally carefully picked up a lotus leaf cake from the small bamboo plate. It was as thin as a piece of paper and almost translucent. It looked like a lotus leaf when it was spread open. It was very beautiful and even a little warm to the touch. "Can this thin pancake really cover the roast duck and the side dishes?" Sally was a little worried. She was afraid that she would break the cake if she didn't sprinkle enough. She carefully spread the cake on the plate in front of her. Then, she picked up a piece of roast duck and dipped it in the sweet sauce. She then picked up 2 green onions and 2 cucumbers and placed them on top of the roast duck meat. After that, she carefully folded the cake from the 4 sides to the center and turned it into a plump cube. Sally picked up the lotus leaf pancake that was wrapped around the duck meat with a look of surprise in her eyes. This thin lotus leaf pancake had incredible tenacity, and it didn't show any signs of damage even after wrapping so many things around it. It's perfectly wrapped. It's the most delicious one piece at a time, Meg said with a smile as he looked at the roast duck wrapped in the lotus leaf cake in Sally's hand. Sally hesitated for a moment after hearing that. Then, she put the duck meat wrapped in the lotus leaf cake that was a little too big into her mouth. The soft skin had a hint of fragrance. After biting into it, the roast duck hidden in the lotus leaf cake began to show its charm. The crispy duck skin and tender duck meat melted in the mouth at the same time, and the rich fragrance spread in the mouth. The more he chewed, the more obvious the fragrance became. The taste buds on the tip of her tongue were completely activated. She greedily sucked on the delicious taste. The green onions were bitten open, and the sweet sauce enhanced the fragrance of the duck meat, making it even more alluring. After the deliciousness wreaked havoc, the cucumber strips that had been almost ignored before began to show their charm. The fresh cucumber made a light crunching sound when bitten, and the trace of greasiness brought about by the sweet sauce and roast duck was completely eliminated. After swallowing it, only a lingering fragrance lingered in the mouth, and it was incomparably refreshing. Sally savored the aftertaste for a while before looking up at Mag. What a special flavor. The biscuit is as thin as paper, the delicious roast duck is slightly piping hot, and the fresh onions and cucumber are all very different things. However, the combination is irresistible, and it's not greasy at all. Roast duck is so delicious. Amy mumbled. She then turned to Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the table and looking at them with curiosity in its eyes. She smiled, and said, Ugly Duckling, you have to grow up quickly too. Meow. Ugly Duckling felt a chill run down its neck, and it instinctively took a few steps back. It stepped on the edge of the counter, and fell off with a thump, drawing raucous laughter from everyone. The delicious roast duck brought unparalleled enjoyment and laughter to the crowd. Meg also picked up a piece of roast duck and carefully tasted it. The flavor, meat, texture, and thickness of the roast duck were all perfect. It was far superior to the Peking roast duck that he had eaten in Kwanjud when he was a child. The roasting technique used on the charcoal allowed the aroma of the fruit to seep into the duck meat perfectly. There wasn't a need for too many condiments, and the meat of the roast duck was far superior to that of the Peking roast duck that had been reared in captivity. Meg swallowed the piece of duck meat, and sighed with emotion. Ducks are fat in autumn. The ancients really didn't lie to me. Ducks that had just finished growing fat in autumn were at their most plump. Phyllis was a little perplexed as she ate the roast duck. Why does this duck taste so familiar? Have I eaten it before? There were 6 of them, 1 roast duck, and 2 plates of lotus leaf pancakes. It was obviously not enough. Hence, halfway through the meal, Mag went into the kitchen to make some food that could fill their stomachs, and that was the end of the lunch. After lunch, Yarbemia had already left with a plate of Yangju fried rice, and so had Barbara. Phyllis was still roasting beef kebabs in the kitchen. Meg looked at Sally, who was using water magic to clean the restaurant, and hesitantly said, Aisha, there's something I want to ask of you. What is it? Sally turned to Meg. This request might be a little too much, and it's also a little unreasonable. You can refuse, there's no need to force yourself. A slightly awkward expression appeared on Meg's face. Boss, just say it. If it's within my ability, I'll try my best. Sally looked at Meg in confusion. This was the first time she had seen Meg so shy. Amy needs to attend a parent-teacher conference at school, and the school wants both parents of the child to be present. I want to ask you, to be Amy's mother. Meg wanted to find a hole in the ground to crawl into. Although he had practiced this conversation many times in his mind, he still felt very awkward when he actually said it to a girl. Sally faltered upon hearing this, and a faint blush appeared on her face as if she had suddenly realized something. Even her normally calm gaze was now tinged with a hint of panic. It's not what you think. I just want you to pretend to be Amy's mother and attend the parent-teacher conference with me. Of course, if you don't think it's suitable, then forget it. This request is a little too much. Meg shrugged and tried to speak in a relaxed tone. Sally looked into Meg's eyes and thought of how much he doted on Amy. Her heart suddenly softened. She hesitated for a moment, then clenched her fist and said, If you think I'm suitable, I can do it. But what do you need me to do? Really? Mag's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing that. The most suitable person for him right now was none other than Sally. If she didn't agree, then he would have to make a trip to the job market to rent a wife. Sally nodded again. Meg thought for a moment and frowned. It's my first time attending a parent-teacher conference, so I don't have much experience. But I should just go through the motions. After all, we're all children, so it shouldn't be too complicated. I'll ask them about the details later. Okay. Sally nodded slightly and moved her gaze away from Meg. Her fingertips moved gently, and a thin stream of water slid through the leaves of the green plants, cleaning all the dust on their surface. However, her gaze was a little unfocused. In the evening, there was a long line outside the restaurant. Did you hear? Mr. Mac is going to release a new dish tonight, Peking duck. Chapter 9:21. Little Boss, is that duck head delicious? Harrison, who was at the front of the line, swallowed his saliva as he looked expectantly at Amy, who was sitting on a stool at the entrance of the restaurant. She was munching on a big duck head with relish in her hands. The customers in the line also swallowed their saliva uncontrollably. That duck head was golden and crispy, glistening with oil. Amy could barely hold it in her hands. She held it in her hands and munched on it. It was as if the whole world was not as important as that duck head in her hands. A blissful expression appeared on her dimpled face. This method was too much. I really want to beat someone up. Amy only reacted after a while. She looked up at Harrison and nodded with a smile. Millimeter, it's delicious. Uncle Grey Fatty, do you want to try it? Yes. Harrison nodded honestly. He looked at the roast duck head in Amy's hands with anticipation. Although this duck head had already been eaten by Amy, he did not mind. Then continued to think. Amy lowered her head and continued to eat the duck head in her hands. Harrison, the customers, although I'm so angry, but why am I still smiling? Does she think she can do whatever she wants just because she's cute? This. How can she be so cute just by eating a duck head? Harrison sighed silently in his heart. As expected, he could not get angry at all when he looked at that adorable little fellow. It's just a roast duck head, and Little Boss can make it taste so delicious. I feel like Mr. Mac is getting more and more out of line. Yeah, what's so great about letting Little Boss eat it for us to see? Do you think I'll want to eat it just by seeing it? Big brother, aren't you going to eat it later? Who said so? I'm going to eat the whole thing. No one can stop me. The customers were discussing softly, and the atmosphere was very lively. Miss Chris, you said you were going to bring me to try a delicious restaurant. Is it Duca's restaurant? I've lived in Chaos City for over 30 years, and I've been back here every year. I'm more familiar with the restaurants in Aiden Square than you are. In a luxurious carriage, an old man wearing a grey silk robe asked Chris with a smile. I'm sure you're more familiar with Chaos City and the Aiden Square than I am. However, I'm not taking you to Duca's restaurant this time. This restaurant wasn't open the last time you came back to Chaos City, Christy said with a smile. She looked at Cyrell with respect in her eyes. Cheryl James was a renowned leather merchant on the Norland continent, and he was also one of the legends of the business world who originated from Chaos City. He was from the same generation as Old Buffett and President Jeffrey, but his business empire wasn't established in Chaos City. Instead, it was established in the Orc race and the Roth Empire. The Orcs who were good at hunting contributed about 60% of the leather to the Norland continent every year, and 90% of that was shipped to various parts of the continent through the James family. Cheryl was the soul of the family and the leader of the James family's business expansion. After a few decades of wandering, Cheryl decided to give up his power and return to Chaos City to retire. The James family didn't have a close relationship with Buffett banks. Even when it came to large amounts of leather, the James family chose to self-transport rather than go through Buffett banks. There was a rumor that old Buffett had something to do with Cheryl leaving Chaos City for the Orcs. Therefore, the rumor that the two men didn't get along was a hot topic in the business circle of Chaos City. However, the two old men didn't agree with this rumor, and neither of them came forward to clarify it, so it attracted even more curiosity. To the staff of Buffett Banks, the leather empire controlled by the James family was undoubtedly a huge piece of fat meat. If they could eat it, not to mention the huge bonus, it would be possible for them to directly enter the top management of Buffett Banks. Christie had the honor of receiving Sherelle a few years ago. Although she was only dealing with a small matter at the time, when she heard that Sherelle had returned to Chaos City, Christie went to see him with the intention of giving it a try. She didn't expect that the kind old man would really meet her. Christie was very encouraged, and the two of them chatted happily. Before coming, Christie had done her homework. Old Mr. Sherelle had been very strict with himself all his life. He didn't like women, and he didn't drink, but he had a special fondness for food. Although he lived in the Orcs territory, he would make time to go to Rodu every month just to taste the food there. Therefore, Christie wasn't in a hurry to talk about the cooperation. Instead, she took the initiative to take Sherelle to a restaurant. Sirel gladly accepted the invitation without putting on any airs. "Oh, a restaurant that just opened? I haven't been back for more than half a year. Is there a better restaurant than Duca's restaurant?" Sherelle was a little surprised. "You'll know when we get there." Christie smiled mischievously, keeping him in suspense. "Now that you mention it, I'm looking forward to it," Sherelle said slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. Duca's restaurant had always been the #1 restaurant in Chaos City, but in the eyes of a glutton like him, it was only SOSO. If it were in Rodu, it wouldn't even be ranked. However, the new restaurant that Chris had mentioned had piqued his curiosity. He wanted to see if the restaurant that Chris had praised to the heavens was worthy of its reputation. The horse-drawn carriage stopped, and Christie lifted the curtain to take a look. She turned to Sherelle with a resigned expression, and said, "Master Sherelle, we're here, but we might have to wait in line for a while." "Wait in line?" Sherelle was a little surprised. He lifted the curtain and looked out. 2 long lines stretched from the entrance of the restaurant named Mammis all the way to the square. There were at least 100 people in each line. He couldn't help but be surprised. "I didn't think there would be so many customers waiting in line. I've never seen this in a restaurant in Chaos City before. Even the most popular restaurants in Rodu didn't have such a large group of customers, so he was rather surprised to see one in Chaos City. "Master, I'll go talk to the owner and let you go first," the middle-aged coachman said respectfully. He jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage and prepared to go to the restaurant. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."